While my husband claimed to be giving a critical presentation to investors on our 10th anniversary, I was setting up hidden cameras at the luxury cabin he'd rented for his weekend with his assistant. As he texted me fake updates about his late meetings, I was coordinating with the private investigator who would document every moment of his betrayal. He has no idea that his supportive wife, who doesn't understand technology, has just hired the city's best divorce attorney and compiled 6 months of evidence for a divorce that will cost him everything he values: his reputation, his position, and half of the company he built by sacrificing our marriage. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from, and if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. My hand remains perfectly steady as I adjust the hidden camera in the bedroom of the lakeside cabin. The irony isn't lost on me that this is the same picturesque retreat James had promised to take me to for our 10th anniversary. The same anniversary he's now missing because of an emergency investor meeting in Chicago. The cabin is exactly as advertised in the listing I found in his browser history: rustic luxury with panoramic lake views, a stone fireplace, and a king-sized bed with Egyptian cotton sheets. The kind of romantic getaway you'd take someone special to. Evidently, after a decade of marriage, I'm no longer that someone. Camera 3 is set, I say quietly into my phone. How's the angle? Perfect, responds Maya, the private investigator. I hired 6 weeks ago when my suspicions became impossible to ignore. I can see the entire bedroom. If they're in there, we'll capture everything. I take a deep breath and move to the kitchen, carefully positioning the 4th camera inside a decorative vase on the counter. Through my earpiece, I can hear Maya directing her associate who's setting up exterior surveillance from a parked car with tinted windows down the road. "Are you sure you want to be there when they arrive?" Maya asks, concern evident in her voice. "We can handle the surveillance remotely. You don't need to see this in person." "I need to be here," I reply, my voice calm despite the storm raging inside me. I need to see his face when he realizes that every lie, every late night at the office, every missed dinner and forgotten anniversary has led to this moment. My phone buzzes with a text from James. "Meeting running longer than expected. Might have to stay overnight. These investors are brutal. Don't wait up, honey. Love you." I screenshot the message, adding it to the folder of lies I've meticulously documented over the last 6 months. The timestamp will match perfectly with his check-in at the cabin, just as his business dinners have consistently aligned with his assistant Olivia's social media posts about magical evenings and unexpected surprises. The GPS tracker I placed on his car weeks ago shows him only 40 minutes away. Right on schedule. "Elena, they've exited the highway," Maya confirms in my earpiece. "ETA approximately 35 minutes. I make one final sweep of the cabin, ensuring everything is in place. The cameras are hidden, the microphone's active, and my escape route planned. I'll be watching from the guest house 100 yards away, close enough to confront them when the time is right, but far enough to avoid immediate detection. As I close the cabin door behind me, I think about the day James and I bought our first home, together. How he carried me across the threshold, promising a lifetime of happiness. The same threshold he'll cross today with another woman, breaking every promise we ever made. In the guest house, I set up the monitors that will stream footage. From all 6 cameras, Maya arrives, her equipment bag in hand, her expression professional but sympathetic. "Everything's ready," she confirms, pulling up multiple feeds on her laptop. The moment they arrive, we'll have video, audio, and photographic evidence of their meeting. Combined with the financial records, text messages, and hotel receipts we've already collected, your attorney will have everything needed for the divorce proceedings. I nod, my gaze fixed on the empty monitors. Jennifer said this should be enough to trigger the infidelity clause in our prenup. Jennifer Davis, the best divorce attorney in Seattle, had been impressed with the evidence I'd already gathered before our first meeting. "Most clients come to me with suspicions," she'd said. "You're coming with a case nearly ready for court." The prenup violation is clear, Maya agrees, checking her equipment one last time, especially with him using company resources to fund this affair. That had been the most bitter discovery, finding out that the business trips, the late meetings, the working weekends that kept James from our anniversary had all been elaborately planned rendezvous with Olivia. The assistant he'd insisted on hiring despite my reservations, the one he'd claimed was exceptional at managing complex details and completely professional. The GPS alert pings. James's car has turned onto the private road leading to the cabin. They're here, Maya says quietly. On the monitor, I watch as James's black Mercedes pulls up to the cabin. He exits first, looking exactly as he would for any business meeting. Tailored suit, polished shoes, the Rolex I gave him for our 5th anniversary gleaming on his wrist. He circles to the passenger side, opening the door with a flourish. Olivia steps out, her hand in his, laughing at something he said. She's wearing a red dress I recognize from the company holiday party last year, the one where James introduced her to me as his invaluable new team member, the one where I'd noticed how his eyes followed her across the room but dismissed my own intuition. Recording all feeds, Maya confirms, her fingers flying over her keyboard. I watch in silence as James retrieves 2 overnight bags from the trunk, one his familiar weekend luggage, the other a designer bag I've never seen before. A gift for Olivia, no doubt. Another expense likely hidden in the company accounts as business development. They walk to the cabin door, arms around each other's waists. James unlocks it with the key he picked up earlier today, during what he told me was a lunch meeting with potential clients. I'd tracked his phone to the property management office, watched through their window as he paid in cash, no doubt to avoid leaving a credit card trail. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. As they enter the cabin, the interior cameras activate one by one. The living room, James pulling Olivia close, kissing her with a passion I haven't seen in years. The kitchen, Olivia unpacking the expensive champagne they stopped for on the drive up, Dom Perignon, my favorite, which James claimed was too expensive for casual occasions, whenever I suggested it for our anniversaries. Are you okay? Maya asks, glancing at me with concern. I realize I'm gripping the edge of the table, my knuckles white with tension. I force myself to relax, to breathe. I'm fine, I say, and surprisingly, I mean it. There's a strange calm that comes with confirmation, with knowing that the gaslighting, the manipulation, the constant dismissal of my concerns was never about my insecurity or imagination. It was always about his betrayal. On the screen, James leads Olivia toward the bedroom, whispering something in her ear that makes her laugh. They're directly under camera 3 now, the one I positioned last. I need audio from the bedroom, I tell Maya. She hesitates. Elena, are you sure? Sometimes not knowing the details is... I need to hear everything, I interrupt, my voice firm. Every lie he's told her about me, every promise he's made to her that belongs in our marriage. I need it all on record. Maya nods, understanding, and adjusts the audio settings. James's voice fills the room. Told her I was in Chicago for the investor meeting. She doesn't suspect a thing. Never question my work schedule. You're terrible, Olivia responds, her tone playful rather than accusatory. Terribly in love with you, James replies, and my stomach twists at hearing words meant for me being given to someone else. I watch as he retrieves a small box from his jacket pocket, a jewelry box from Winston's where he bought my engagement ring a decade ago. I helped him choose his mother's 70th birthday gift last month, completely unaware that he'd made another purchase during that same visit. What's that? Olivia asks, her eyes widening. Just a little something for the woman who's made this past year the most exciting of my life, James answers, opening the box to reveal a diamond bracelet that catches the light from every angle. The same bracelet I'd admired during that shopping trip. The same one he'd dismissed as unnecessarily extravagant when I'd tried it on. My phone buzzes again. Another text from James. Investors finally satisfied with the presentation. Having a quick dinner, then heading to the hotel. How was your day, beautiful? I don't respond. Instead, I take a screenshot of the message, time-stamping it at 7:42 p.m., and then turn back to the monitors where the real James is now fastening the bracelet around Olivia's wrist, his lips on her neck, his wedding ring clearly visible on his hand. That's enough, I say quietly, standing up. We have what we need. Maya looks at me questioningly. The confrontation wasn't part of the plan until tomorrow morning. We agreed it would be better to gather a full night of evidence. Plans change, I reply, gathering my coat and purse. I've seen enough. It's time he sees me. As I step out of the guest house into the crisp evening air, I feel a strange sense of liberation. For months, I've lived in uncertainty, questioning my own perception, wondering if I was imagining the distance, the missed calls, the emotional absence. Now, with each step I take toward the cabin, I am walking away from doubt and toward clarity. By the time the sun rises on what should have been the morning after our anniversary celebration, James will understand exactly what happens when you mistake silence for weakness and patience for ignorance. Behind me, Maya is gathering the portable evidence, video files being backed up, photographs being uploaded to secure servers, recordings being time-stamped. Ahead of me lies the confrontation that will end my marriage, but begin my liberation from a decade of increasingly hollow promises. My phone buzzes one final time. James again. Miss you. Can't wait to be home tomorrow and make up for missing our anniversary. Planning something special for you. I smile at the message, my first genuine smile in months. Yes, something special is indeed coming. Just not in the way he imagines. 10 years ago, James and I stood under a flower-adorned arch at the Rosewood Gardens, exchanging vows that promised forever. I still remember the conviction in his voice when he said, "I choose you, today and every day." The irony of those words isn't lost on me as I walk toward the cabin where he's chosen someone else on the very day meant to commemorate that promise. Our love story had begun 3 years earlier at Seattle Pacific University. I was studying psychology, hoping to become a family therapist. James was an ambitious business major with plans to revolutionize the tech industry. We met when his startup team needed help designing a user experience survey. My professor recommended me, and what was supposed to be a 2-hour consultation turned into a 7-hour conversation that spilled from the campus coffee shop to a nearby restaurant, and finally to a moonlit walk along the waterfront. You see people, James had said that night, his eyes reflecting the harbor lights. Not just their behaviors or their responses to questions. You see what drives them. He'd looked at me with such admiration, such genuine interest. That's exactly what's missing from most business models, understanding the human element. That night, I'd seen him too. His passion, his vision, his earnest desire to create something meaningful. I fell in love with the man who valued my insights, who claimed my perspective, changed how he viewed the world. For 5 years, that's who we were, partners in every sense. When James founded Meridian Technologies, I was there, working late nights, to help him refine his business plan, testing early software versions, offering feedback on client presentations. We built his dream together, brick by digital brick. The first anniversary we celebrated was in our tiny studio apartment, eating takeout on a makeshift table of moving boxes because we'd spent our furniture budget on server space for his fledgling company. I didn't mind. We were building something together, not just a business, but a life. Next year, I'm taking you somewhere amazing, he'd promised, feeding me lo mein from cheap wooden chopsticks. somewhere that matches how extraordinary you are. The following year, he did. A weekend in Vancouver at a boutique hotel where he thanked me repeatedly for believing in him, for supporting his vision, for being patient while he built something worthy of our future. The third year, Meridian Technologies secured its first major client. Our celebration was delayed by 2 weeks because James needed to oversee the implementation personally. I understood. The business was growing, demanding more of his time. When we finally celebrated, he seemed distracted, checking his phone throughout. Dinner. "I'm sorry," he'd said, noticing my disappointment. "It's just that this client could mean everything for our future. I need to make sure nothing goes wrong." Year by year, anniversary by anniversary, the pattern continued. Delays became postponements. Postponements became rain checks. Rain checks became abbreviated celebrations squeezed between his meetings and business trips. Each time, there was a reason: an important client, a system launch, a potential investor, and each time, I was understanding, supportive, patient. Until our 8th anniversary, when I'd planned a surprise weekend getaway to the San Juan Islands, only to have James cancel at the last minute for an emergency server migration that couldn't be rescheduled. I'd gone alone, sending him photos of sunsets he should have seen with me, receiving apologetic texts in return. Later, I discovered through a colleague's social media post that the emergency had somehow accommodated a team happy hour at an upscale Seattle bar, one where James was pictured with his arm around a young woman I didn't recognize. When I asked about it, he dismissed my concerns. "Elena, that's Olivia, our new project coordinator." The team was stressed after the migration. I took them out to boost morale. It was nothing. I wanted to believe him. Needed to believe him. After all, I'd invested a decade of my life in our relationship, sacrificed my own career advancement. To support him, postponed our plans for a family until Meridian Technologies was stable enough. So I ignored the late-night texts, the sudden increase in business trips, the new cologne he didn't wear around me, the growing emotional distance that made me feel like a roommate rather than a wife. I ignored it all because admitting there was a problem meant acknowledging that our life together, the future we'd planned, might be built on shifting sand. Our 9th anniversary passed with a hurried dinner where James spent more time on his phone than in conversation with me. He gave me an expensive necklace that felt more like compensation than celebration. "I know I've been distant," he'd admitted that night, reaching for my hand across the table. "The company's growing so fast, and with it, the responsibilities. But once we secure the Westlake contract, things will calm down. I promise." I nodded, wanting to believe him, even as I noticed how he'd mentioned the business first, us second. An ordering that had become increasingly common in our conversations. The Westlake contract came and went. Things didn't calm down. If anything, James became more absent, physically present in our home, but emotionally elsewhere. When he was with me, he was tethered to his phone, responding to emails and texts at all hours. One night, I woke at 3 a.m. to find his side of the bed empty. I found him in his home office, laptop open, typing intently. When I asked if everything was okay, he startled, quickly closing a chat window. "Just finalizing some documents for tomorrow's meeting," he'd said, not quite meeting my eyes. "Go back. To bed, honey." Instead, I'd gone to the kitchen for water, glancing back to see him reopen the chat. The blue light of the screen illuminated his face as he smiled at whatever message had appeared. I didn't confront him. Not then. But the next morning, for the first time in our marriage, I checked his phone while he showered. There was nothing suspicious in his texts or emails. James was too careful for that. But his browser history showed searches for weekend getaways near Seattle and best restaurants for special occasions. Our anniversary was approaching. I'd allowed myself to hope that perhaps he was planning something special, returning to the thoughtful husband I'd once known. Then came the announcement, the Chicago investor meeting, scheduled for the exact dates of our anniversary weekend. I tried to reschedule, he'd claimed, looking appropriately disappointed. But these investors are only in the country on these specific dates. This could mean international expansion, Elena. It's huge for Meridian. I nodded, swallowing my disappointment, playing the supportive wife one more time. I understand. We can celebrate when you get back. But this time, I didn't just accept his explanation. This time, I paid attention to the details. How he packed his favorite aftershave that had sat unused in our bathroom cabinet for months. How he carefully selected his clothing with unusual attention to detail. And how he made a call from our garden that he didn't want me to overhear. That night, after he'd gone to sleep, I did something I'd never imagined doing in our marriage. I installed a tracking app on his phone and synced his location data to my laptop. The next day, I called Maya Sullivan, a private investigator recommended by a colleague who'd gone through a divorce last year. I'd presented my suspicions, half hoping she would tell me I was being paranoid, that there was surely an innocent explanation. Instead, she'd listened carefully, then said the words that finally shattered my carefully maintained denial. Mrs. Reeves, in my 15 years of experience, when someone believes their spouse is cheating, they're usually right. The question isn't whether something is happening, it's how much evidence you need to confirm it. It took Maya less than a week to deliver the first photographs. James and Olivia entering a boutique hotel in Portland during what was supposed to be a solo business trip. Another week brought credit card statements showing dinner reservations for two at restaurants James had once claimed were saved for special occasions, with me. Then came phone records revealing hundreds of texts exchanged during times James claimed to be in meetings or asleep. The evidence mounted, methodical and irrefutable. Each new discovery another crack in the foundation of what I'd thought was our life together. Still, some part of me needed absolute certainty, needed to eliminate any possibility of misunderstanding. Which is why, when Maya reported that James had reserved a remote luxury cabin for the weekend of our anniversary, paid for in cash, but confirmed through her sources at the property management company, I knew we'd reached the moment of undeniable truth. Now, standing outside that very cabin, hearing their laughter through the open windows, I wonder how I could have been so blind. For so long, or perhaps not blind, but willfully unseeing, choosing the comfort of illusion over the pain of reality. Behind me, Maya approaches quietly, a tablet in her hand. Elena, there's something else you should see before you go in there. She shows me a document on the screen, an email from James to his company's financial officer, marked urgent and confidential. In it, James directs the transfer of $50,000 from the company's operational account to a personal account I've never seen before, with instructions to classify it as strategic consulting services. This was sent yesterday, Maya explains. Based on our financial investigation, he's been moving company funds to this account for the past 4 months. Small amounts at first, growing larger recently. He's planning to leave, I realize, the final piece falling into place. Not just me, but possibly the company too. Maya nods grimly. The timing and pattern suggest he's preparing for a significant life change. I take a deep breath, straightening my shoulders as I look back at the cabin. Through the window, I can see James refilling their champagne glasses, the diamond bracelet glinting on Olivia's wrist as she reaches for him. Let's adjust the plan, I tell Maya, a new determination hardening my voice. I'm not just confronting my husband about an affair anymore. I'm protecting my future from a man who's planning to discard both his marriage and his business responsibilities. She hands me a small device. Wear this. It will record everything. Whatever happens in there, we'll have it documented. I clip the tiny recorder to my collar, hidden by my scarf. 10 years of memories, promises, and shared dreams have led to this moment. I think of all the times I compromised, accommodated, and rearranged my life to fit James's priorities. Of all the anniversaries celebrated late or not at all, this anniversary will be different. This one, he'll remember. The first hint that something was wrong came exactly 3 months ago. It wasn't anything dramatic, no lipstick on his collar, or mysterious hotel receipts falling from his pocket. It was much subtler, a change in patterns. For 10 years, James had been a creature of habit. He took his coffee black in the morning, called me during his lunch break, and always kissed me goodbye, even if we'd been arguing. These small constants had been the framework of our marriage, the reliable minutiae that formed our shared life. Until suddenly, they weren't. It started with the lunch calls stopping. Too many back-to-back meetings, he'd explained when I mentioned it. Then came new habits. The password on his phone changed from my birthday to something I didn't know. His laptop, once left open on the kitchen counter without concern, now closed whenever I entered the room, but it was the goodbye kisses that truly signaled something had shifted. They became perfunctory, distracted, sometimes forgotten entirely. When I pointed this out one morning, his response was telling. Do we really need to maintain every routine we've had since our 20s? That question lingered with me as I drove to work at the community counseling center where I'd built my practice. The dismissive tone, the implication that our rituals were somehow juvenile or unnecessary, it felt like a small tear in the fabric of our relationship. Not enough to destroy it, but enough to catch my attention. That same day, I had a session with a client struggling with her husband's infidelity. As she described the signs she'd missed, his sudden interest in his appearance, unexplained absences, emotional withdrawal, I felt an uncomfortable resonance with my own situation. Sometimes we don't want to see what's right in front of us, she'd said, tears streaming down her face. Because seeing it means we have to do something about it. Her words followed me home, where I found James working late in his home office. He barely looked up when I entered, his focus entirely on his screen. When I asked about his day, he gave vague, distracted responses. When I suggested we plan something for our upcoming anniversary, he mumbled non-committally about seeing what his schedule looked like. That night, I lay awake beside him, cataloging changes I'd been willfully ignoring. The late nights at the office had increased from occasional to regular. The business trips had doubled in frequency. His phone now stayed in his pocket rather than on the nightstand. And Olivia's name had begun appearing in his stories about work with growing frequency. Olivia, who had joined Meridian Technologies 8 months earlier. Olivia, whose hiring James had personally overseen, breaking his usual protocol of leaving HR decisions to his department heads. Olivia, who was always exceptionally insightful and thinking outside the box, according to James's frequent praise. The next morning, I did something I'd never done before. While James showered, I checked our cell phone account, reviewing his call and text history. The results were illuminating. Dozens of calls to and from the same number, often late at night or early morning, sometimes lasting over an hour. The number wasn't saved under any contact name on the bill, but I had a growing suspicion about who it belonged to. That evening, I casually mentioned that I was thinking of joining a company event, a team-building workshop scheduled for the following week. James's reaction was immediate and forceful. "Those workshops are mind-numbingly dull," he said quickly. "Besides, it's really just for employees. Having spouses there would change the dynamic." I nodded, pretending to accept his explanation. But his response only deepened my suspicions. In the early years of the company, I'd regularly attended such events. James had wanted me there and had valued my observations about team interactions. What has changed? The next day, I called Carmen, an administrative assistant at Meridian who'd been with the company since its founding. Under the guise of planning a surprise for James, I inquired about the upcoming workshop. "Workshop?" Carmen had sounded confused. "There's nothing on the calendar for next week except the executive retreat at Whidbey Island." My stomach tightened. Oh, James must have mixed up the dates. Who's attending the retreat? Just the executive team, Carmen replied, then hesitated. And Olivia, of course. James insisted she attend to take notes, even though that's not typically part of her role. After thanking Carmen, I sat in my car in the counseling center's parking lot, trying to process this information. James had lied, not just about his availability for our anniversary, but about a company event that didn't exist. And while he'd claimed he couldn't celebrate with me, he'd be spending the weekend on a beautiful island with his assistant. Still, I needed more than suspicions and circumstantial evidence. I needed certainty. Over the next few weeks, I became a detective in my own marriage. I noted when James said he was working late and cross-referenced with his car's location on our shared vehicle tracking app, a feature we'd set up years ago for safety that he'd apparently forgotten about. I documented discrepancies between his claimed business dinners and the restaurant charges that appeared on our credit card, noticing that the amounts were typically appropriate for 2 people, not a group. I created a detailed spreadsheet, meticulously tracking patterns. Nights he claimed to be working late at the office when his car was actually parked at an upscale apartment building downtown. Business lunches that extended well into the evening. Weekend emergency work sessions that coincided with Olivia's absence from her usual yoga class, which I confirmed by creating a fake Instagram account to follow her public posts. Each discovery was a small wound, but I continued my investigation with clinical detachment, as if I were analyzing someone else's life, rather than watching my own marriage disintegrate through a collection of data points and timestamps. The definitive evidence came when I decided to surprise James at the office one evening when he was supposedly working late. The security guard in the lobby greeted me warmly. I'd been a regular presence in the early years of the company. "Mrs. Reeves, haven't seen you around much lately." "I've been busy," I replied with a smile. "Just bringing James some dinner since he's working so late." The guard looked confused. "Mr. Reeves left about 2 hours ago, with Ms. Parker, Olivia Parker." I maintained my composure, making up a story about crossed signals and forgotten plans. Then I returned to my car and pulled up the location tracking app. James's car was at the Olympic Hotel, one of Seattle's most exclusive establishments. I drove there without a clear plan, acting on impulse rather than strategy. In the hotel lobby, I hesitated, suddenly uncertain. Did I really want to see whatever was happening upstairs? Did I want to create a scene that would be impossible to come back from? As I stood there contemplating my next move, fate intervened. The elevator doors opened, and out walked James and Olivia, his hand resting intimately on the small of her back. They were dressed formally, clearly having attended dinner or drinks somewhere in the hotel. Neither noticed me partially hidden behind a large floral arrangement. I watched as James leaned down to whisper something in Olivia's ear that made her laugh, the kind of genuine, uninhibited laugh that comes from comfort and intimacy. Then, in full view of anyone who cared to look, he kissed her. Not a friendly peck, not a professional goodbye, but the kind of kiss that told a story of many kisses before it, and the anticipation of many more to follow. In that moment, something broke and reformed within me. The hope that I was wrong, that there was an innocent explanation, shattered completely. But in its place came clarity and a cold determination I hadn't known I possessed. I didn't confront them. Instead, I quietly left the hotel and drove home, my mind working with newfound precision. By the time James returned home 3 hours later, I had dried my tears and developed the beginnings of a plan. "How was work?" I asked casually when he walked in, spinning the same tired story about a client emergency and database issues. "Exhausting," he sighed, avoiding my eyes. "I'm going to grab a quick shower." As I heard the water running, I made 2 decisions. First, I would not confront him without irrefutable evidence that would stand up in divorce proceedings. Second, I would not be the victim in this story. The next morning, I made an appointment with Jennifer Davis, the divorce attorney whose reputation for handling high-asset separations with ruthless efficiency had made her something of a legend in Seattle. I told no one, not my friends, not my family, not my colleagues. This was a chess game now, and I intended to play it several moves ahead. "Given what you've told me," Jennifer said during our first meeting, "and Washington's position as a community property state, you're entitled to half of all assets acquired during the marriage. That includes his company, which was built substantially during your marriage and from what you've described, with your direct support and input. What about the affair?" I asked. "Does that matter legally?" Jennifer's expression was measured. "Washington is a no-fault state, so adultery itself doesn't impact the division of assets. However," she leaned forward, "if he's using company resources to fund the affair, trips, gifts, possibly even her salary if she's not performing legitimate work, that's different. That's misappropriation of marital assets, potentially even fraud if investor funds are involved." She tapped her manicured nails on her desk thoughtfully. "What we need is documentation. Incontrovertible evidence that he's using marital or company assets to conduct this affair." "How do I get that?" "Legally?" Jennifer raised an eyebrow. "You hire a professional." That afternoon, I contacted Maya Sullivan, beginning the surveillance operation that would eventually lead to me standing outside a luxury cabin on what should have been our anniversary weekend, preparing to confront my husband and his mistress with evidence of their betrayal. The discovery of their affair was painful, but in some ways, it was also liberating. The uncertainty was gone. The second-guessing and self-doubt had vanished. In their place was a clarity of purpose I hadn't felt in years. As I prepared to knock on the cabin door, I remembered something my grandmother had told me when I was a teenager. "The most dangerous person in any room is the quiet one who's been watching everything." For months, I had watched. I had gathered information. I had prepared. Now, it was time to act. Most betrayed spouses react instantly, driven by hurt and rage. They confront, they accuse, they throw clothes on the lawn, they change locks, they post angry social media updates that they later regret. Their pain and anger, however justified, often undermine their position when it comes to divorce proceedings. I chose a different path. The morning after I witnessed James and Olivia at the Olympic Hotel, I woke before dawn, my mind remarkably clear despite having barely slept. James lay beside me, oblivious to the fact that his carefully constructed double life had begun to unravel. I studied his sleeping face, the face I'd woken up to for a decade, the face I'd once believed would never deliberately hurt me. "I'll be working late again tonight," he murmured over breakfast, not meeting my eyes. "Don't wait up." "New project?" I asked, keeping my voice casual as I poured his coffee exactly the way he liked it. "Something like that." He checked his watch, the Breitling I'd saved for 6 months to buy him for his 35th birthday. "I should get going. Early meeting." As he leaned in for his perfunctory goodbye kiss, I noticed it, the faint scent of an unfamiliar perfume, barely detectable but definitely present. Another piece of evidence, another small betrayal. After he left, I called in sick to the counseling center, the first time I'd done so in 3 years. Then I sat at our dining room table and mapped out a strategy with the same methodical attention to detail that I'd once given to helping James build his business plan for Meridian Technologies. Step 1. Secure my financial position. I logged into our joint accounts and reviewed the transaction history, taking screenshots of anything unusual, large cash withdrawals, unexplained transfers, restaurant and hotel charges in locations where James claimed to be working. I downloaded 3 years of credit card statements, tax returns, and investment account summaries. Next, I opened a new bank account at a different bank than the one we normally used. I transferred exactly half of our joint savings into it, an amount that would be considered reasonable and non-vindictive in divorce proceedings. I redirected my paychecks from the counseling center to this new account. I gathered important documents, our marriage certificate, house deed, car titles, insurance policies, and scanned them to a secure cloud storage account that James couldn't access. I then returned the originals to our home safe, making sure everything appeared undisturbed. Step 2. Document the timeline. At my next session with Jennifer Davis, I presented a detailed chronology of our marriage, particularly the last 2 years. I included every business trip, late night, and work emergency that now seemed suspicious in retrospect. I noted when Olivia had joined the company and how James's behavior had changed afterward. "This is impressive," Jennifer remarked, reviewing my documentation. "Most clients come to me emotional and scattered. You're approaching this like a research project." "I'm a therapist," I reminded her. "I understand the importance of establishing patterns and collecting data." Jennifer nodded approvingly. "This timeline will be extremely valuable, but we need more than circumstantial evidence if we want to establish misuse of company resources." "What specifically should I be looking for?" "Financial trails," she replied without hesitation. "Gifts purchased with company cards. Business trips that weren't actually business. Company resources used for personal purposes. And most importantly, any indication that he's attempting to hide assets or transfer funds in anticipation of a potential divorce." Step 3. Engage professional assistance. That afternoon, I met Maya Sullivan at a coffee shop far from my usual haunts, where there was little chance of running into anyone who knew James or me. Maya was not what I had expected. Based on detective shows, I'd anticipated someone hardened and cynical. Instead, she was a poised woman in her 40s with intelligent eyes and a matter-of-fact demeanor. She listened carefully as I explained my situation, occasionally making notes in a small leather-bound notebook. "Most of my clients come to me earlier in the process," she observed when I finished. "Usually when they first suspect something, not after they've already confirmed the affair." "I needed to be sure before taking this step," I explained. "And now I need documentation that will stand up in court." Maya nodded. "Smart approach. Washington is a no-fault state, but if your husband is using company funds to finance this relationship, that's a different matter entirely." She sounded remarkably similar to Jennifer. "What kind of evidence are you hoping to gather?" "Everything," I said simply. "Text messages, photos, video, financial records. I want to know where they go, what they do, what they spend, and who pays for it. I want to know if he's planning to leave me, leave the company, or both. I want to know if investor funds are being misappropriated. But most importantly, I want evidence that can't be explained away or denied." Maya studied me for a moment. "Mrs. Reeves, with all due respect, are you sure you want to go down this road? Some clients find that having their suspicions confirmed in vivid detail only adds to their pain." I met her gaze steadily. "I've spent the last 6 months doubting myself, questioning my perceptions, and making excuses for inexcusable behavior. The pain is already there. What I need now is the truth, all of it, so I can make informed decisions about my future." She nodded, seeming to appreciate my resolve. "In that case, I'll need some preliminary information." Over the next hour, I provided Maya with James's schedule, his usual haunts, the make and model of his car, and everything I knew about Olivia Parker, which, as it turned out, was surprisingly little despite her frequent appearance in James's work stories. "One last question," Maya said as our meeting concluded. "What's your objective here? Are you hoping to save your marriage, or are you preparing for divorce?" The question gave me pause. I had been so focused on uncovering the truth that I hadn't fully articulated what I planned to do with that truth once I had it. I'm preparing for whatever reality requires, I finally answered. If that's divorce, then I want to approach it from a position of strength and knowledge. If there's any chance of salvaging my marriage, I trailed off, realizing how unlikely that scenario had become. I understand, Maya said, sparing me from having to complete the thought. We'll proceed carefully and discreetly. I'll be in touch within 3 days with preliminary findings. True to her word, Maya contacted me exactly 3 days later with her initial report. What she had uncovered in just 72 hours was both more and less than I had expected. The affair with Olivia was indeed real and ongoing. Maya had photographic evidence of them entering and leaving a downtown condo together, a property that, according to records, had been leased by Meridian Technologies 6 months earlier as a corporate apartment for visiting clients. She had documented 3 meetings during the supposed workdays that extended well beyond business hours, including one lunch that lasted from noon until nearly 5 in the evening. But there was more. Maya had discovered that James had recently moved a substantial sum, $75,000, from a company account to a personal account I knew nothing about. He had also met twice with Calvin Wright, a competitor who had previously attempted to acquire Meridian Technologies. These meetings had not appeared on any company calendar and had taken place at an out-of-the-way restaurant known for its private dining rooms. "What do you think this means?" I asked, staring at the photos of James and Calvin deep in conversation. "I can't say for certain," Maya replied carefully. "But in my experience, when a company executive meets secretly with a competitor while moving personal funds around and conducting an affair with a subordinate, it often indicates preparation for a major life change." He's planning to leave, I realized. Not just me, but possibly the company too. It's a working theory, Maya. Agreed. We need more information to confirm it. Step 4. Monitor and document systematically. Over the following weeks, Maya's surveillance operation expanded. She tracked James's movements, photographed his meetings with both Olivia and Calvin Wright, and documented every unexplained expense. Meanwhile, I maintained my role as the unsuspecting wife, continuing to make his favorite meals, asking about his day, and never once indicating that I knew about his betrayal. "You're remarkably composed," Jennifer observed during one of our meetings. "Most clients in your position find it difficult to maintain the facade." "I've had practice," I replied, surprising myself with the bitterness in my voice. "I've been pretending our marriage was fine for longer than I care to admit. The only difference now is that I'm doing it strategically rather than out of denial." The most difficult challenge wasn't maintaining the pretense with James. It was keeping my investigation secret from friends and family. Several times, my mother called to chat and asked if everything was all right, her maternal intuition detecting the strain in my voice despite my assurances. My closest friend, Sarah, similarly noticed my withdrawal and increased cancellations of our regular lunch dates. "You'd tell me if something was wrong, wouldn't you?" she pressed during one of our rare get-togethers. "Of course," I lied, hating the deception but knowing I couldn't risk James discovering my plans through our overlapping social circles. The breaking point came when Maya called me on a Tuesday afternoon. "Mrs. Reeves, I've just received information that requires immediate attention." Her tone alarmed me. "What is it?" "Your husband has reserved a luxury cabin at Lake Crescent for this coming weekend. It's registered under his name but paid for with what appears to be a company credit card. According to my source at the property, it's been booked as a special romantic weekend." I checked the calendar on my phone, though I already knew what date was approaching. "Our anniversary is this Saturday." "Yes," Maya confirmed. "And according to your husband's assistant's credit card, she just purchased lingerie from La Perla yesterday afternoon." The final piece clicked into place. James wasn't just having an affair. He was planning to celebrate our 10th anniversary with his mistress at a romantic lakeside cabin, paid for with company money, while I sat at home believing he was at a business meeting in Chicago. Something hardened inside me. The last lingering hope that there might be an explanation, that our marriage might somehow be salvageable, evaporated completely. In its place rose a cold, clear determination. "I want eyes on that cabin," I told Maya, my voice steady. "Full surveillance, inside and out." "You're talking about cameras," Maya said carefully. "There are legal considerations." "I'm aware," I interrupted. "I've discussed this contingency with Jennifer. Given that the cabin was rented with company funds, and there's reason to believe company business is being conducted inappropriately, we have grounds. I'll sign whatever waivers are necessary." There was a brief silence on the line. "May I speak frankly, Mrs. Reeves?" "Please." "Most clients in your position would be falling apart right now. The fact that you're thinking about legal grounds for surveillance instead of confronting your husband immediately is unusual." I considered her observation. "I spent years as the supportive wife who never questioned, never demanded, never prioritized her own needs. That woman was betrayed and taken advantage of. I won't let that happen again. I won't act from emotion when strategy will serve me better." Maya's response was measured. "In that case, we have work to do. The cabin will need to be accessed before they arrive. We'll need to set up equipment, establish remote monitoring. Not just remote," I decided. "I want to be there." "Mrs. Reeves, Elena, I strongly advise against that. Witnessing your husband's infidelity firsthand could be traumatic and might prompt an emotional response that compromises our operation." "I'm not interested in witnessing the infidelity," I clarified. "I'm interested in confronting it, but only after we have everything on record. I want to see his face when he realizes that I know everything, that I've always been 2 steps ahead of him. That time, he's the one who underestimated me." After a pause, Maya sighed. "I'll make the arrangements. But promise me you'll follow the plan exactly as we establish it. No improvising, no emotional decisions." "Agreed," I said firmly. "This isn't about emotion anymore. It's about justice." Step 5. Execute with precision. Which is how, 3 days later, I found myself outside the luxury cabin at Lake Crescent. Hidden cameras already transmitting footage of my husband and his mistress celebrating what should have been my anniversary. Preparing for a confrontation that would change all of our lives forever. "Camera 6 is operational." Maya's voice came through my earpiece, professional and calm. "We now have complete coverage of the main living areas, bedroom and exterior. Approaches." I checked the tablet in my hands, watching as the various camera feeds populated the screen. The main room of the cabin appeared, where James was opening another bottle of champagne, Dom Perignon, the brand he'd always claimed was too expensive. Whenever I suggested it for our own celebrations, Olivia lounged on the sofa, wearing a silk robe I'd never seen before, the diamond bracelet glinting on her wrist as she held out her glass. "Let's review what we have so far," I said, forcing myself to focus on facts rather than the painful imagery before me. Maya nodded, switching to professional mode. "We've documented them arriving together at 3:17 p.m. We have clear footage of him using the company credit card to purchase champagne and groceries at the local market on their way here. We've recorded multiple instances of him referring to this as a celebration weekend and specifically mentioning to the property manager that it's a special anniversary trip." "And the financial documentation?" I asked. "Complete," Maya confirmed. "The cabin rental was charged to Meridian Technologies under the budget line for client relations. The same card was used for dinner reservations tomorrow night at Alder and Vine, the lakeside restaurant that requires bookings weeks in advance." I noted the details with bitter irony. I'd suggested that same restaurant for our anniversary 6 months ago, but James had claimed it was unnecessarily extravagant. "What about the company funds transfer?" I pressed. "We've traced the money," Maya replied, pulling up financial records on her laptop. "The $75,000 was moved from the company's operational account to a personal account under James's name only. Then $50,000 of that was transferred to an offshore account yesterday. Based on the documentation we've gathered, it appears he's been systematically moving company funds for at least 4 months. And his meetings with Calvin Wright? We have photographs, audio recordings of 2 meetings, and copies of documents that were exchanged. Maya hesitated. Elena, those documents appear to contain proprietary information about Meridian's clients and technology, the kind of information that would be valuable to a competitor. The implication was clear. James wasn't just betraying me. He was betraying his company, his partners, his employees. The scale of his deception was expanding beyond even what I had imagined. When did you last check in with Jennifer? Maya asked, referring to my attorney. This morning. She's prepared to file the divorce petition immediately after this weekend. She's also drafted letters to Meridian's board of directors regarding the financial improprieties, but those won't be sent until we have this final piece of evidence. I gestured toward the tablet showing James and Olivia in intimate conversation. Jennifer believes that combining the divorce filing with the revelation of his misuse of company funds will prevent him from accessing resources to fight back effectively. Maya nodded approvingly. A coordinated approach. Smart. For the next hour, we methodically documented every conversation between James and Olivia, paying particular attention to any mention of their plans, their relationship timeline, or company matters. Though part of me wanted to look away, to protect myself from the painful reality of their intimacy, I forced myself to watch and listen, treating it as evidence rather than emotional torture. So what happens after this weekend? Olivia was asking, curled against James on the sofa. With the transfer going through and the meeting with Calvin next week? Then we're free, James replied, kissing her forehead. The preliminary agreement with Westbrook Ventures is already drafted. Once they acquire Meridian's client list and core technology, Calvin handles the transition, and we get our payout. 3 months in Bali while the dust settles, then we can start fresh wherever we want. I froze, my blood running cold. Did he just say what I think he did? Maya was already typing furiously. He's planning to sell company information to a venture capital firm. That's corporate espionage, possibly even fraud depending on how the deal is structured. And his partners have no idea, I realized. The board thinks the meetings with Calvin are about a potential collaboration, not selling out the company from under them. This changes things, Maya said quietly. We're no longer just documenting an affair and financial impropriety. This is potentially criminal activity. I stared at the tablet, at the man I had once loved so completely, now revealed as someone I barely recognized. Can we get this on record? Something clearer than just their conversation? If they discuss it again, yes. The audio quality is excellent, but ideally, we'd capture them reviewing documents or explicitly stating their intentions. Maya hesitated. There's also another option. Your confrontation might prompt them to reveal more details, especially if they believe they've already been caught. The idea of using myself as bait, of strategically guiding the confrontation to elicit incriminating statements, was both disturbing and oddly appealing. After months of being manipulated, the thought of orchestrating the situation to my advantage held a certain poetic justice. Let's wait, I decided. Monitor their conversations tonight. If they don't provide more explicit evidence, we'll adjust the confrontation plan for tomorrow to try to draw it out. As night fell, James and Olivia moved to the bedroom. Though Maya offered to turn off the monitor during their intimate moments, I insisted on keeping the surveillance active. This wasn't voyeurism. It was documentation of the final betrayal in our marriage, evidence that would be necessary for the divorce proceedings. You should try to get some rest, Maya suggested around midnight, after James and Olivia had fallen asleep. Tomorrow will be demanding, emotionally and strategically. But sleep was impossible. Instead, I spent the night reviewing the evidence we'd gathered, not just from this weekend, but over the past months of investigation. I reread the text messages Maya had recovered from James's phone backup. Messages that revealed the affair had begun almost immediately after Olivia joined the company. I studied the financial records showing how James had slowly, systematically begun moving assets, as if preparing for a major life change. I examined photographs of him meeting with Calvin Wright in secluded restaurants, documents changing hands, under the table. The picture that emerged was of a man methodically dismantling his old life while constructing a new one, all while I remained unaware, making dinner reservations for our anniversary and wondering why my husband seemed increasingly distant. By dawn, my emotional exhaustion had transformed into a cold, clear resolve. This was no longer just about exposing an affair or securing a fair divorce settlement. This was about stopping James from betraying everyone who had trusted him. His wife, his business partners, his employees, his investors. As the first light broke over the lake, Maya returned from a brief rest looking refreshed and focused. "They're still asleep," she reported, checking the monitors. "Based on the dinner reservation they made, I expect they'll remain at the cabin until at least 6 p.m. "What's our surveillance status?" I asked. "All business now. All cameras functioning perfectly. We have approximately 18 hours of recorded audio and video so far. The quality is excellent. Facial expressions, conversations, interactions with the diamond bracelet, explicit statements about their relationship." I nodded, satisfied. "And the financial documentation?" "Complete and backed up to secure servers," Maya confirmed. "Jennifer already has access to everything except last night's recordings, which I sent this morning." My phone buzzed with a message. From James. "Morning from Chicago. Investors loved the presentation. Taking them to brunch now. How did you sleep, beautiful?" I stared at the message, then at the monitor showing James still asleep beside Olivia, his arm draped possessively across her waist. The disconnect between the two images was so stark, it was almost laughable. "His deception is so practiced," I murmured. "So effortless." People who become comfortable with lying often develop elaborate systems to maintain their fabrications, Maya observed. They create parallel realities and move between them with increasing confidence. "Until those realities collide," I added, my finger hovering over the message notification. Should I respond? Maintain the illusion that I still believe him? Maya considered this. "What would you normally do?" I thought about it. "I'd wish him luck with the investors. Ask when he's coming home. Tell him I miss him." "Then do exactly that," Maya advised. "Until the moment of confrontation, give him no reason to suspect anything has changed." I composed a reply that fit perfectly with the supportive, oblivious wife James believed me to be. "Morning. Glad the presentation went well. Miss you too. What time does your flight get in tomorrow?" His response came quickly. "Late afternoon, probably around 4. Can't wait to see you and make up for missing our anniversary. I have something special planned for next weekend." "More lies," I muttered, setting down the phone. "He's planning to be in Bali with her by next weekend." On the monitor, James was waking up, stretching beside Olivia. He reached for his phone on the nightstand, presumably to check if I had responded to his message. Satisfied with our exchange, he set the phone down and turned his attention back to Olivia, waking her with kisses along her shoulder. "I think I've seen enough," I said, turning away from the monitor. "Let's review the confrontation plan." Over the next hour, Maya and I went through every detail of how the confrontation would unfold. Timing, approach, key points to address, legal considerations, safety precautions. We discussed multiple scenarios and responses, preparing for however James might react to being caught. Denial, aggression, attempts to manipulate or gaslight me. "Remember," Maya emphasized, "the goal isn't to engage in an emotional argument. It's to formally document his presence here, his relationship with Olivia, and ideally, to get him to confirm details about the company information he's planning to sell. I understand, I assured her. This isn't about closure or catharsis. It's about evidence. But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't entirely true. Part of me, a part I'd been suppressing for months, desperately wanted to see the look on James's face when he realized I wasn't the naive, trusting wife he'd taken me for. When he understood that while he'd been constructing his elaborate deception, I'd been meticulously documenting every lie, every betrayal, every step he'd taken toward destroying our marriage and his company. Around noon, the monitor showed James and Olivia preparing lunch in the cabin's kitchen, laughing as they moved around each other with the easy familiarity of established lovers. On the counter sat an envelope that hadn't been there earlier. "Can you zoom in on that?" I asked, pointing to the envelope. Maya adjusted the camera, bringing the document into focus. It was labeled Westbrook Ventures Preliminary Agreement, in bold text. "That's it," I breathed. "The evidence of corporate espionage." "If we could get that document," Maya began. "We need to move up the timeline," I decided. "Confront them now, while that document is accessible." Maya looked concerned. "That's a significant deviation from our plan. Are you sure?" I nodded, already gathering my things. "We have enough evidence of the affair. What we need now is concrete. Proof of his plan to sell company information. That envelope is our opportunity." After a brief discussion, we adjusted our strategy. I would approach the cabin alone while Maya monitored the feeds and recorded everything. The confrontation would focus first on the affair, then transition to questions about the envelope and the deal with Westbrook Ventures. "Remember, your safety is the priority," Maya insisted, checking the small recording device concealed in my jewelry. "If at any point you feel threatened, use the code word anniversary, and I'll call the local police immediately." I nodded, taking a deep breath to center myself. "I'm ready." As I walked the short path from the guest house to the main cabin, I felt a strange sense of calm. 10 years of marriage had led to this moment, not the romantic anniversary celebration I'd once envisioned, but a confrontation that would expose the truth and potentially save dozens of jobs at Meridian Technologies. I paused at the cabin door, hearing James and Olivia's laughter from inside. Then, with steady hands, I knocked 3 times, loud and deliberate. The laughter stopped abruptly. Through my earpiece, I could hear Maya reporting what she saw on the monitors. They're looking at each other in alarm. James is asking if they're expecting anyone. He's moving toward the door now. I straightened my shoulders and lifted my chin. The time for hiding in the shadows, for quiet observation and documentation, was over. The door opened, and James's expression transformed from casual inquiry to absolute shock as he registered my presence. "Elena?" he managed, his voice strangled. "What? How? Hello, James," I said calmly. "Aren't you going to invite me in? After all, this is our anniversary weekend." The look on James's face was worth every moment of pain I'd endured over the past months. Every sleepless night, every forced smile, every unanswered question. His expression cycled rapidly through shock, confusion, fear, and finally settled on something resembling panic as he struggled to process my unexpected appearance. "Elena," he repeated, as if saying my name might somehow make sense of the situation. "What are you doing here? How did you find you?" I finished for him, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. "That's an interesting question coming from a man who's supposed to be in Chicago." From inside the cabin, Olivia called out, "James? Who is it?" I raised an eyebrow. "Aren't you going to introduce me to your anniversary date?" His face paled further. Behind him, Olivia appeared in the doorway wearing his dress shirt, the one I'd given him last Christmas. She froze when she saw me, her eyes widening in recognition. "Mrs. Reeves," she stammered, clutching the shirt closer around her body. This isn't please, I interrupted. Let's skip the part where you both insult my intelligence with transparent lies. I think we're well past that point, don't you? I stepped forward, forcing James to either back up and let me enter or physically block me. Even in his state of shock, he knew better than to put his hands on me with witnesses potentially present. He stepped aside, and I walked into the cabin as if I'd been invited. The interior was exactly as I'd seen on the surveillance feeds: champagne bottles, scattered clothing, the remains of their lunch on the kitchen counter. And there, exactly where I'd spotted it, was the envelope labeled Westbrook Ventures Preliminary Agreement. Through my earpiece, Maya whispered, "Perfect positioning. We have clear visuals and audio." "What a lovely getaway," I remarked, glancing around the cabin. "Lake Crescent was an excellent choice. I've always wanted to come here." I turned to James, who remained frozen by the door. "You know that, of course. I've only mentioned it about a dozen times over the years." Olivia looked like she wanted to disappear. I'll just... She gestured toward the bedroom. "Oh, don't leave it on my account," I said pleasantly. "After all, you're clearly an important part of this conversation." James finally found his voice. "Elena, I can explain—" "Can you?" I asked, genuinely curious to hear what explanation he might possibly offer. "Please, go ahead. Explain how you're in Chicago giving a presentation to investors while simultaneously here with your assistant. Explain how you've been too busy for our anniversary, yet managed to plan this romantic getaway. Explain the company credit card charges, the diamond bracelet, the offshore account." With each item I listed, his face grew paler. "You've been investigating me?" he managed, sounding both outraged and terrified. "I prefer to think of it as educating myself," I replied coolly. "Learning the truth about my marriage, my husband, and apparently the company we built together." Olivia looked sharply at James. "You said she didn't have anything to do with the company anymore, that she'd lost interest years ago." I laughed, a short, humorless sound. "Is that what he told you? That's fascinating, considering I still hold 20% of Meridian's shares and sit on the advisory board." "You never come to meetings," James countered, attempting to regain some control of the situation, "because you deliberately schedule them when I'm seeing clients at the counseling center," I replied evenly. "A fact I confirmed with Carmen last month. Just like you schedule emergency work sessions during family events and critical client meetings on our anniversary," I turned to Olivia. "He's quite methodical about maintaining his separate worlds. I'm sure you've noticed." Uncertainty flickered across her face. Good. Seeds of doubt were being planted. "This is private property," James said, switching tactics. "You need to leave. We can discuss this at home." "Private property paid for with Meridian Technologies money," I corrected him. "Which makes this less a romantic getaway and more a misappropriation of company resources. Something I'm sure the board and the shareholders would be interested to know about." James blanched. "You wouldn't I?" I challenged myself. I gestured to the envelope on the counter. "Just like they might be interested in your arrangement with Westbrook Ventures, the one you've been discussing with Calvin Wright." Behind everyone's backs. The mention of Westbrook Ventures and Calvin Wright had an immediate effect. James lunged toward the counter, grabbing the envelope and holding it against his chest like a shield. "How do you know about that?" he demanded, real fear in his voice now. "Have you been spying on me?" "I've been paying attention," I corrected. "Something you assumed I was incapable of doing. You thought I was the same naive young woman who believed every excuse, who never questioned why the numbers didn't add up, who trusted you implicitly despite mounting evidence to the contrary." I moved to the sofa and sat down, deliberately taking my time, letting them feel off balance by my composure. "That woman is gone, James. In her place is someone who knows exactly what you've been doing, with company money, with Meridian's proprietary information, and with your assistant. Olivia flinched at being reduced to her professional title. James, maybe we should— Be quiet, he snapped at her, then immediately composed himself. Turning back to me, he attempted a conciliatory tone. Elena, listen. I know this looks bad, but if you'll just let me explain— I'd be fascinated to hear your explanation, I said sincerely. Please, tell me how selling Meridian's client list and technology to a competitor isn't betraying everyone who's worked to build the company. Explain how transferring $50,000 to an offshore account yesterday isn't preparation for absconding with stolen funds. Clarify how planning 3 months in Bali while the dust settles isn't an admission of guilt. With each specific detail I provided, James's expression shifted from desperate control to horrified realization. He was finally understanding that I didn't just know about the affair, I knew everything. How long have you been watching us? He whispered. Long enough, I replied simply. Then, addressing the true goal of this confrontation, I added, the agreement with Westbrook. Does the board know about it? Does anyone at Meridian besides you? James remained silent, clutching the envelope tighter. James, Olivia urged, looking increasingly anxious. Maybe we should call Calvin. Calvin Wright, I clarified, maintaining the record for the surveillance footage. The competitor you've been secretly meeting with to arrange the sale of Meridian's intellectual property and client relationships. It's not like that, James protested weakly. Then what is it like? I pressed. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're selling out your partners, your employees, and your investors for a personal payout. How much is Westbrook giving you? Is it worth destroying everything you've built? Through— My earpiece, Maya murmured. Perfect. Keep him talking about the deal. James ran a hand through his hair, visibly calculating his options. Finally, he attempted a new approach. Elena, you're making assumptions based on incomplete information. Yes, I've been talking with Westbrook about a potential acquisition, but it's a legitimate business transaction that would benefit everyone at Meridian. If it's legitimate, why the secrecy? I asked reasonably. Why meet with Calvin Wright privately, instead of in the boardroom? Why transfer company funds to personal accounts? Why tell Olivia you'll be spending 3 months abroad while the dust settles? James shot a venomous look at Olivia, clearly blaming her for revealing too much during what he'd thought were private conversations. The board is resistant to change, he argued, shifting to a confident, persuasive tone I recognized from his investor presentations. They're stuck in outdated thinking about the company's direction. This deal with Westbrook would provide liquidity for shareholders, job security for employees, and a global platform for our technology. Then present it to the board, I challenged. Convince them with the same arguments you're trying to use on me. It's not that simple, he hedged. Because they wouldn't approve of selling client data without consent? Because the terms benefit you personally at the expense of other stakeholders? Because this— I gestured to the envelope he was still clutching— isn't an acquisition. Proposal, but something much less ethical? James's jaw tightened. He was running out of excuses, and we both knew it. You have no right to interfere in business matters, he tried, his tone hardening. Whatever you think you know— I know enough, I cut him off, standing up. I know that our marriage has been a fiction for months, possibly years. I know that you've been systematically preparing to leave both me and Meridian, transferring assets, making arrangements, creating your exit strategy. I took a step toward him. What I don't know is when you became someone who could betray everyone who trusted you without a second thought. For a moment, something that looked almost like shame flashed across his face. Then it was gone, replaced by cold calculation. What do you want, Elena? He asked flatly. Money? The house? Name your price and let's end this. The casual cruelty of his offer, reducing 10 years of marriage to a transaction, should have hurt. Instead, It confirmed everything I already knew about the man standing before me. He wasn't the James I had married. Perhaps he never had been. "What I want," I said clearly, ensuring the recording would capture every word, "is for you to understand exactly what you've lost and what you're about to lose. I've already spoken with Jennifer Davis. Divorce papers will be filed first thing Monday morning, citing adultery, financial misconduct, and irreconcilable differences." James paled at the mention of Jennifer Davis, Seattle's most formidable divorce attorney. "Additionally," I continued, "the board of directors will receive a complete report of your unauthorized meetings with Calvin Wright, your misappropriation of company funds, and your attempts to sell proprietary information without approval. That report will include financial records, surveillance footage, and witness statements." "You're bluffing," he said, but without conviction. "You couldn't possibly have—" "6 months," I interrupted. "That's how long I've been documenting everything, James. Every late night that wasn't actually spent at the office. Every business trip where you were with Olivia instead of clients. Every suspicious withdrawal. Every secret meeting. Every lie you told me while looking me directly in the eyes." I turned to Olivia, who had shrunk back against the wall, her earlier. Confidence evaporated. "He's been lying to you too, you know. About his intentions, about the timeline, probably about leaving his wife. Men who betray their partners so systematically rarely change their patterns." "Don't listen to her," James told Olivia sharply. "She's just trying to manipulate you because she's hurt." "I'm not hurt, James," I corrected him. "I'm done. Done with the lies. Done with the gaslighting. Done with pretending I don't see what's right in front of me." I glanced at my watch. "You have exactly 24 hours to clean the board yourself. After that, they receive my report and all supporting evidence." "You would destroy the company just to get back at me?" he demanded incredulously. "I'm not destroying anything," I replied calmly. "I'm preventing you from doing so. Meridian can survive without you. The question is whether you can survive without Meridian once the board understands what you've been planning." I retrieved my purse from where I'd set it down, maintaining my composure even as James stared at me with a mixture of rage and disbelief. "One last thing," I added, turning back at the door. "I've arranged for a detailed financial audit of all company accounts you've accessed in the last 12 months. The auditors begin work Monday morning. I suggest you use your 24 hours wisely." As I walked out the door, I heard Olivia's panicked voice behind me. "James, what does this mean for us? For the Westbrook deal? For Bali?" I didn't stay to hear his response. I had said what needed to be said, documented what needed to be documented. The rest would unfold according to the plans I had carefully set in motion. Maya met me at the guest house, her expression a mixture of professional approval and personal concern. "That was masterfully done," she said, checking the recording equipment to ensure everything had been captured. "You got him to essentially confirm the Westbrook deal and his plans to leave the country." "Did we get enough?" I asked, the adrenaline that had carried me through the confrontation beginning to ebb. "More than enough for both the divorce proceedings and the board report," she confirmed. "Especially combined with the financial documentation and surveillance footage we already had." I nodded, suddenly exhausted. The weight of the past 6 months, the investigation, the deception, the strategic planning, and now the confrontation, crashed down on me all at once. "What happens now?" I asked, more to myself than to Maya. "Now," she said gently, "you take care of yourself while the legal and corporate processes we've set in motion do their work. James will either come clean to the board as you demanded, or he won't. Either way, his actions have been documented and the consequences are inevitable." I looked back toward the cabin, where my husband of 10 years was presumably trying to salvage his plans with his mistress, the man who had once promised to love me forever, who had built a company with my support and input, who had systematically betrayed everything we had created together. "He really thought I'd never find out," I said quietly. "That I'd just keep believing the lies accepting the excuses, never questioning where he was or what he was doing. People who become comfortable with deception often underestimate those they're deceiving, Maya observed. They mistake patience for gullibility and silence for ignorance. I smiled faintly, remembering my grandmother's words. The most dangerous person in any room is the quiet one who's been watching everything. For months, I had watched. I had gathered evidence. I had prepared. Today, I acted. "Let's go," I said, turning away from the cabin and whatever chaos was unfolding inside it. "We have a report to finalize for the board." As we drove away from Lake Crescent, leaving behind the romantic getaway that had instead become the site of my marriage's final unraveling, I felt something unexpected. Not grief or rage or vindication, but a profound sense of liberation. For the first time in years, I was no longer trying to save a marriage that existed only in my memory. I was no longer making excuses for a man who had stopped deserving them long ago. I was no longer the supportive wife who compromised her own needs and ignored her own intuition. I was simply Elena, clear-eyed, determined, and finally free. The board meeting was scheduled for 9 a.m. Monday morning at Meridian Technologies' sleek downtown headquarters. I arrived at 8:30, accompanied by Jennifer Davis, whose reputation as Seattle's most formidable divorce attorney had executives and administrative staff alike watching us with undisguised curiosity as we were escorted to the conference room. "Are you ready for this?" Jennifer asked quietly as we arranged our materials at one end of the polished mahogany table. "More than ready," I replied, checking my phone one last time. No messages from James since our confrontation at the cabin 2 days ago. According to Maya's surveillance, he and Olivia had left Lake Crescent separately Saturday evening. James, returning to our home where he'd spent hours making frantic phone calls, and Olivia to her apartment where she'd immediately begun packing. The board members began arriving at 8:45, 5 executives I'd known for years, some since Meridian's founding. Richard Harmon, the silver-haired chairman who had been James's first investor. Sophia Wu, the technical genius who had helped develop the company's core algorithms. Marcus Fitzgerald, the marketing strategist who had secured their initial client base. Teresa Gonzalez and Daniel Park, who had joined more recently as the company expanded. Each greeted me with varying degrees of warmth and confusion. While I was known to them all, my presence at a board meeting, especially one accompanied by a prominent attorney, was unprecedented. "Elena," Richard said, clasping my hand warmly. "This is an unexpected pleasure. Is James joining us?" "That remains to be seen," I replied enigmatically. "But I believe he's aware of the meeting." Richard's eyebrows rose, but he didn't press further, taking his seat at the head of the table. At precisely 8:58, Calvin Wright entered the room, looking distinctly uncomfortable. The board members exchanged puzzled glances. Calvin was the CEO of Technovate, a direct competitor to Meridian. His presence at a board meeting was highly unusual, if not entirely inappropriate. "Mr. Wright," Richard said stiffly, "I wasn't aware you were invited to this meeting." "I received a rather urgent request to attend," Calvin replied, his eyes darting to me. "From Mrs. Reeves." All eyes turned in my direction. "Mr. Wright's presence will become clear shortly," I assured them. "Please, have a seat." At 9 a.m., the door opened again, and James walked in. He looked haggard, with dark circles under his eyes and his normally immaculate appearance noticeably disheveled. He froze momentarily when he saw me, then Calvin, then Jennifer, before visibly composing himself. "Good morning," he said, attempting to project his usual confident demeanor. "I see we have some unexpected guests today." "Yes," Richard agreed, looking increasingly perplexed. "Perhaps you could clarify why your wife, her attorney, and the CEO of our chief competitor are attending a private board meeting." James glanced at me, a silent question in his eyes. I met his gaze steadily, making it clear I wasn't going to rescue him from this situation. "Actually," he began, clearing his throat, "I have a matter to discuss that's relevant to their presence." Through our confrontation at the cabin and the 24-hour ultimatum that followed, I had wondered which path James would choose. Would he attempt to get ahead of the situation by coming clean to the board himself? Or would he double down on his deception, forcing me to expose everything I had discovered? Now I had my answer. Self-preservation had won out over further denial. "Before you begin, James," I interjected smoothly, "I think it's important that everyone understands why I requested this emergency meeting." I turned to the board members. "For the past 6 months, I have been conducting an investigation into certain financial and ethical irregularities involving Meridian Technologies." "Elena," James warned, his voice tight. "I said I would handle this." "You had your chance to handle it," I replied evenly. "You had years of chances. Now it's my turn." Jennifer opened her briefcase and distributed folders to each board member. These documents outline evidence of substantial financial misconduct, unauthorized negotiations with competitors, and planned sale of proprietary company information without board approval. The executives began flipping through the folders, their expressions shifting from confusion to concern to outright alarm. "What is this?" Sophia demanded, looking up from a spreadsheet detailing suspicious fund transfers. "James, what have you done?" James remained standing, his hands gripping the back of his chair. "It's not what it looks like," he began, but Richard cut him off. "It looks like you've been transferring company funds to personal accounts," the chairman said coldly, holding up a financial report. "It looks like you've had at least 7 undisclosed meetings with Calvin Wright." He glanced at Calvin, who had the grace to look uncomfortable. "And it appears you've been preparing to sell our client list and proprietary technology to Westbrook Ventures without board knowledge or approval." Teresa was reviewing the surveillance photographs. "These dates," she said, her voice tight with anger. "You told us you were meeting with the Singapore investors when you were actually with Calvin at the Metropolitan Club." "I can explain," James insisted. But his usual smooth confidence was crumbling under the collective weight of the evidence and the board's growing hostility. "Please do," I encouraged him. "Explain how you've been systematically betraying the trust of everyone in this room. Explain how you plan to sell out the company you built, the people who believed in you, the employees who depend on Meridian for their livelihoods." Calvin shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "For the record," he said, "I was under the impression that these discussions had board approval." James represented himself as having full authority to negotiate a potential acquisition. "Of course he did," I nodded. "Just like he represented himself as being in Chicago this weekend, while he was actually at Lake Crescent with his assistant, celebrating what should have been our anniversary." The personal revelation landed like a bomb in the already tense atmosphere. Marcus looked at James with undisguised disgust. Sophia shook her head in disbelief. Richard's expression hardened further. "These are serious allegations," Daniel said, looking up from the folder, "but they appear to be extensively documented." "There's more," Jennifer added, activating the conference room's display screen. "With Mrs. Reeves's permission, we have prepared a brief presentation outlining the timeline of events and the evidence collected." Over the next 20 minutes, the room fell silent as Jennifer methodically presented the case against James. Financial records showing his systematic misappropriation of company funds, surveillance footage of his meetings with Calvin and other Westbrook representatives, transcripts of conversations where he explicitly discussed selling proprietary information, email exchanges planning his departure from both the company and our marriage. Throughout the presentation, I watched James. His initial attempts at maintaining composure gradually gave way to resigned defeat as he realized the thoroughness of my investigation and the completeness of the evidence against him. "When," Jennifer concluded, Richard turned to James, his expression one of profound disappointment. In 25 years of business, I have never witnessed such a comprehensive betrayal of trust. Do you have anything to say in your defense? James looked around the table at the colleagues who had become his jury, then finally at me, the wife, whose support had helped build his success, whose trust he had exploited, and whose intelligence he had fatally underestimated. The company was stagnating, he said finally, his voice hollow. The board was resistant to necessary changes. The Westbrook deal would have provided liquidity and growth opportunities that— Save it, Sophia interrupted disgustedly. You weren't exploring a legitimate acquisition. You were selling out the company for personal gain while planning to disappear to Bali with your mistress. She glanced at the transcript pages in her folder. Your own words, James. Recorded at the cabin. He flinched at that, his eyes darting to me with new understanding of just how thoroughly his deception had been documented. I think we've heard enough, Richard said decisively. He turned to the other board members. I move for immediate suspension of James Reeves from all positions within Meridian Technologies, pending full financial and legal investigation. Seconded, Sophia said immediately. All in favor? Richard looked around the table. 5 hands, raised without hesitation. The motion passes unanimously, Richard announced. He turned to James. You will surrender all company property, access credentials, and files immediately. Security will escort you to clear out your personal items, supervised at all times. Your accounts are frozen, and you are prohibited from contacting any Meridian employees, clients, or partners. James stood motionless, seemingly unable to process how quickly his world was collapsing. Additionally, Richard continued, turning to Calvin Wright, Meridian Technologies will be filing formal complaints with the appropriate regulatory bodies regarding the attempted acquisition of stolen proprietary information. Mr. Wright, I suggest you contact Westbrook Ventures immediately and withdraw from any agreements predicated on James's unauthorized representations. Calvin nodded stiffly, already pulling out his phone as he stood to leave. For what it's worth, he said, pausing at the door. I truly believe James was acting with board authority. He glanced at me. It seems I'm not the only one who underestimated. Mrs. Reeves, after Calvin departed, Richard turned to me. Elena, I cannot express how grateful we are that you brought this to our attention before irreparable damage was done. Your loyalty to Meridian, despite your personal circumstances, is extraordinary. I helped build this company, I replied. Simply. I couldn't stand by and watch it be dismantled for personal gain. Richard nodded thoughtfully, then addressed the room. In light of these developments, we have significant challenges ahead, reassuring investors, stabilizing leadership, reviewing all recent decisions for potential irregularities. He paused, then looked at me speculatively. Elena, given your intimate knowledge of the company's history and operations, would you consider joining us in an advisory capacity during this transition? The offer caught me by surprise. For years, James had minimized my contributions to Meridian, scheduling meetings when I couldn't attend, gradually pushing me to the periphery of the company we had built together. Now, in a twist of poetic justice, his attempt to exclude me had led directly to this moment of inclusion. I would be honored, I replied, a sense of rightness settling over me. Though I should note that my divorce proceedings will be ongoing, which may complicate matters. On the contrary, Jennifer interjected smoothly, given Mr. Reeves's documented financial misconduct involving company resources, having you involved in Meridian's recovery process strengthens your position regarding the equitable distribution of marital assets, particularly his ownership stake in the company. James, who had remained silent during this exchange, finally spoke. You planned this all along, didn't you? He asked, looking at me with a mixture of anger and reluctant respect. Not just exposing the affair, but setting yourself up to take my place at Meridian. No, James, I corrected him. I didn't plan any of this. You did. Every decision that led to this moment was yours. Every lie, every betrayal, every step away from the person I thought you were. I gathered my papers calmly. I simply paid attention and responded accordingly. Security is waiting outside, Richard informed James. I suggest you cooperate fully to avoid further complications. As two security officers entered the conference room, James took one last look around the table at the colleagues whose trust he had violated, his expression finally showing a glimmer of understanding about the magnitude of what he had lost. When he reached the door, he turned back to me. I never thought you would, he began, then stopped, seemingly unable to find the words. That was your mistake, I told him quietly. You saw what you expected to see, the supportive, unquestioning wife who would never challenge your version of reality. You forgot who I really am. As James was escorted out of the boardroom and out of the company he had built, I felt no triumph, no vindication, no satisfaction in his downfall. What I felt was simpler and more profound, the quiet certainty that justice, however belated, had finally been served. The rest of the meeting focused on damage control and transition planning. As an initial step, Richard appointed me to a temporary oversight committee tasked with auditing all company accounts and client relationships that James had managed. It was the first of many changes that would reshape Meridian in the coming months, changes I would help guide from within rather than support from the sidelines. When the meeting concluded, Jennifer and I walked together to the elevator. That went even better than anticipated, she observed. The board appointment gives you significant leverage in the divorce proceedings. That wasn't why I did it, I told her honestly. I know, she replied with a knowing smile. But it's a remarkably satisfying side effect, don't you think? As the elevator doors closed, I caught a glimpse of James being escorted through the lobby, a small box of personal items in his arms, his expression shell-shocked. The man who had once commanded the company with charismatic confidence now reduced to a security-escorted exit under the watchful eyes of employees who had once admired him. What do you think he'll do now? Jennifer asked, following my gaze. I don't know, I admitted, and for the first time in 10 years, I don't have to care. Outside the building, the Seattle spring sunshine broke through the morning clouds, casting the city in a fresh, clear light. I took a deep breath, feeling as though I was truly seeing my surroundings and my future for the first time in months. The path ahead would not be easy. The divorce proceedings would be complex, the work at Meridian challenging, the emotional aftermath of betrayal still to be fully processed. But for the first time since I had discovered James's deception, I felt something like optimism stirring within me. I had faced my moment of truth, the pivotal decision between continued denial and difficult action, and I had chosen truth, however painful. In doing so, I had not only exposed James's betrayal, but rediscovered my own strength, my own voice, my own capacity for decisive action. And that, I realized as I stepped into the sunlight, was the most valuable discovery of all. The fallout from that Monday morning board meeting rippled outward with surprising speed and intensity. By noon, James's company email had been deactivated, his parking space reassigned, and his name removed from Meridian's website. By evening, the company had issued a carefully worded statement announcing his immediate departure to pursue other opportunities, the corporate equivalent of being pushed off a cliff. I spent that first day in back-to-back meetings with Richard and the executive team, reviewing financial records and client accounts to assess the full extent of James's tampering. The Westbrook Ventures deal had been more advanced than anyone realized, with preliminary paperwork already drafted and several key client relationships potentially compromised. He was thorough, Sophia observed grimly as we reviewed the documents, retrieved from James's office safe. He's been laying this groundwork for at least 8 months. That tracks with when Olivia was hired, I noted, remembering how James had personally overseen her recruitment, despite HR's concerns about her lack of relevant experience. Speaking of Olivia, her resignation letter arrived by courier before the end of the business day. A terse, formal document that made no mention of her relationship with James or her knowledge of his plans. According to Maya, who continued monitoring key developments, Olivia had been seen that morning at Seattle-Tacoma International Airport, checking in for a flight to San Diego. Running home to family, most likely, Maya suggested when she called to update me. Based on her recent financial activity, she's liquidated several investments and closed her local accounts. It appears she's cutting ties with Seattle entirely. And James? I asked, realizing I had no idea where my husband, soon-to-be ex-husband, had gone after being escorted from Meridian's offices. Currently at the Alexis Hotel, Maya reported. He checked in around noon with just a small suitcase. He's made several calls to attorneys but hasn't left the room since arriving. I absorbed this information with a strange detachment. Just days ago, knowing James was at a hotel would have sparked pain and jealousy, assumptions about who he might be with. Now, it was simply data, the movements of a person who had become almost a stranger to me. Will you continue monitoring him? I asked Maya. That depends, she replied carefully. Are you concerned about your safety or potential retribution? I considered the question. Not physical safety, no. But given what we've uncovered about his financial maneuvers, I wouldn't put it past him to try hiding assets or accessing accounts. He shouldn't. Understood. We'll maintain basic surveillance through the divorce proceedings, focusing on financial movements rather than personal activities. After ending the call, I sat alone in what had once been James's office at Meridian, a sleek corner space with panoramic views of Elliott Bay that the board had temporarily assigned to me during the transition. The walls were bare, personal items removed, leaving only furniture and the faint lingering scent of James's cologne. 10 years of marriage, and this was what remained. Empty walls, financial investigations, and surveillance reports delivered, in the dispassionate language of professional detection. There should have been more grief, I thought. More rage. More of the raw, messy emotions that typically accompanied such profound betrayal. Instead, I felt a curious clarity, as if the months of suspicion and investigation had processed those emotions in advance, leaving me with just the practical aftermath to manage. My phone buzzed with a text from Jennifer. Judge Harrison granted the emergency order freezing all marital assets. James cannot access joint accounts or sell property until further court review. Another piece of the protective structure falling into place. Jennifer had warned me that men like James, accustomed to control and unused to consequences, often reacted to divorce by attempting to hide assets or inflict financial damage out of spite. The emergency order prevented such tactics, securing our shared resources until they could be fairly divided. As evening approached, I reluctantly prepared to return to the house that James and I had shared for the past 7 years. A modernist structure in Madison Park with wall-to-wall windows overlooking Lake Washington. While legally still our marital home, James's hotel check-in suggested he wouldn't be there, which was a relief. I wasn't ready for another confrontation so soon. The house was indeed empty when I arrived, but it no longer felt like home. Every room contained memories now tainted by knowledge of James's deception. The kitchen where we'd hosted dinner parties while he texted Olivia underneath the table. The living room where he'd taken work calls that were actually conversations with her. The bedroom where he'd returned late from supposed client meetings smelling of unfamiliar perfume. I wandered through the spaces, seeing everything differently. On the mantel, our wedding photo. James looking directly at the camera with the confident smile I'd once found so charming. Me gazing at him with transparent adoration. Had he been planning his betrayals even then? Or had they evolved gradually, one small deception leading to another until full-scale betrayal became simply the next logical step? The house phone rang, startling me. Few people use that number anymore. Most called our mobiles directly. I hesitated, then answered. Elena. Diana's voice, James's mother. I've been trying to reach you all day. What on earth is happening? James called in a state about some board meeting and security escorts. He's not making any sense. Diana and Jeffrey Reeves lived in Portland, where Jeffrey had built a successful architectural firm before retiring 5 years ago. They had always been kind to me, if somewhat distant, the type of in-laws who remembered birthdays with expensive, impersonal gifts and called dutifully on major holidays. I had no idea what James might have told them, or how much they deserved. To know, Diana, I acknowledged, buying myself time to decide how to respond. This is a complicated situation. He says you ambushed him at some company meeting, she continued, her voice tight with maternal concern. That you've been spying on him and freezing accounts. Elena, this doesn't sound like you at all. I took a deep breath. Diana, I'm sorry. You've been drawn into this, but James hasn't been honest with you. Or with me. We're separating due to his infidelity and some serious financial improprieties that affected Meridian. A long silence followed. Infidelity? She finally repeated, her voice smaller. Are you certain? James wouldn't... I have documented evidence, I interrupted gently but firmly. It's been going on for months with his assistant. There are also issues with company funds that I can't discuss in detail, but they're significant enough that the board took immediate action. Another silence, longer this time. I could almost hear her recalibrating her understanding of her son, adjusting the image of the successful, devoted husband she'd believed him to be. I don't know what to say, she finally admitted. Jeffrey and we raised him better than this. This isn't a reflection on your parenting, I assured her, surprising myself with the impulse to comfort her. James made his choices as an adult. Will you be all right? She asked unexpectedly. Financially, I mean. If there's anything we can do, I'll be fine, I told her, touched by her concern despite everything. I have good legal representation and support from the board at Meridian, but thank you for asking. After promising to keep them updated as appropriate, I ended the call feeling oddly lightened. Diana's reaction, her immediate concern for my welfare rather than blind defense of her son, was unexpected and oddly validating. My phone buzzed, again with a text, this time from Sarah, my closest friend who had noticed my withdrawal over the past months. Just heard rumors about James leaving Meridian. Are you okay? Can I come over? News traveled fast in Seattle's tech circles. Rather than attempt to explain via text, I simply replied, Please do. Bring wine. Sarah arrived 45 minutes later with not just wine, but takeout from our favorite Thai restaurant, and a fierce, protective expression that softened into shock as I related the events of the past days, weeks, and months. I knew something was wrong, she said, pouring us each another glass of Pinot Noir as I finished explaining. You've been distant, distracted. But this? Elena, why didn't you tell me what was happening? I needed to be sure first, I explained. And once I was sure, Jennifer advised keeping everything confidential until we had all the evidence secure. The more people who knew, the greater the risk that James would realize I was investigating. Sarah shook her head, processing everything I'd shared. The board meeting must have been incredible. I wish I could have seen his face when he realized what was happening. It wasn't about humiliating him, I clarified, though I understood the sentiment. It was about stopping him from doing more damage. To me, to Meridian, to everyone who trusted him. Still, Sarah insisted, after what he put you through, he deserved to be exposed. And now you're working with the board? That's the ultimate poetic justice. I smiled faintly. It's temporary, just to help with the transition. But yes, there's a certain symmetry to it. We talked late into the night, the conversation shifting from the specifics of James's betrayal to broader reflections on relationships, trust, and the subtle ways in which I had gradually diminished my own needs and perceptions to accommodate his increasingly selfish behavior. "You know what amazes me," Sarah said as she prepared to leave around midnight. "You did all of this, the investigation, the evidence gathering, the confrontation, without becoming bitter or vengeful. You could have destroyed him completely, but you only exposed what was necessary to protect yourself and the company." Her observation stayed with me after she left, as I moved through the quiet house preparing for bed. Was it restraint that had kept me from seeking more dramatic revenge? Or simply a pragmatic assessment of what would best serve my interests in the long run? Whatever the reason, I was grateful not to be carrying the additional burden of vindictive actions I might later regret. The consequences James faced, professional disgrace, divorce, potential legal repercussions, were entirely of his own making, the natural results of his choices rather than punishments I had engineered. The next morning brought a flurry of developments. Jennifer called early to inform me that James had retained Brandon Mitchell, a divorce attorney known for aggressive tactics and publicity-seeking behavior. "This suggests he's preparing for a contentious process," Jennifer warned. "Possibly looking to spin media narratives or pressure you through public scrutiny." "Let him try," I replied, unconcerned. "The evidence speaks for itself." At Meridian, the executive team was working to contact key clients who might have been approached by James or Calvin regarding the unauthorized Westbrook deal. Most expressed shock, but ultimately renewed their commitment to Meridian once the situation was explained. "The Smith account was wobbly," Richard reported during our midday meeting. "But Sophia walked them through the security upgrades we're implementing, and they've agreed to stay at least through the next quarter." By Wednesday, 3 days after the board meeting, the initial crisis management phase was transitioning into more strategic recovery planning. The board approved a comprehensive financial audit, appointed an interim CEO from within the company, and formally extended my advisory role for 6 months. Meanwhile, James had begun a calculated media campaign, giving an exclusive interview to a sympathetic business journalist who portrayed him as the victim of a coordinated corporate coup, engineered by a vindictive spouse with personal grievances. The article carefully avoided any direct accusations that might constitute defamation, but painted him as an innovative leader whose vision had been too progressive for Meridian's conservative board. "Should we respond?" Richard asked during our afternoon call. "No," I said decisively. "Engaging would only extend the news cycle. The audit results will speak for themselves when completed." Jennifer agreed with this approach when I consulted her. "Let him generate headlines now," she advised. "Our focus is on the legal process, where evidence matters more than public relations." That evidence continued to grow as the forensic accounting team dug deeper into James's financial activities. By Friday, they had identified nearly $300,000 in misappropriated funds, carefully disguised as legitimate business expenses, but actually used for personal purposes, including the diamond bracelet for Olivia, weekend getaways documented as client, meetings and substantial cash withdrawals justified with fabricated receipts. "Each new discovery strengthens our position," Jennifer noted during our end-of-week meeting. "The judge has scheduled our initial hearing for next Thursday. Based on the evidence compiled, I'm confident we'll secure very favorable temporary orders regarding support and asset preservation." As Friday evening approached, I found myself facing the first weekend of my new reality. No pretense of a marriage to maintain, no husband whose movements needed tracking, no strategic plans to implement. Just time alone with my thoughts in a house that no longer felt like home. The prospect was both liberating and terrifying. For so long, my focus had been external, documenting James's betrayal, planning my response, executing that plan with strategic precision. Now, with those immediate goals accomplished, I would need to confront the deeper emotional aftermath and begin imagining a future I had never anticipated. As I prepared to leave Meridian's offices, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "You think you've won. This isn't over." James, presumably using a new phone since his regular number was known to me. I showed the message to Maya, who happened to be delivering her weekly surveillance update. Typical, she observed, unsurprised. When men like James lose control of a situation, they often resort to vague threats to restore their sense of power. Would you like me to have someone keep an eye on the house this weekend? I considered the offer, then shook my head. No, he's trying to intimidate me, but he's not stupid enough to do anything that would further damage his position legally. Still, Maya advised, document the message and any others you receive, and perhaps stay with a friend this weekend. Just as a precaution. I nodded, appreciating her concern, but knew I wouldn't take that last suggestion. I needed to face the empty house, the remnants of the life I had believed in, and begin the process of deciding what to keep and what to leave behind, both literally and figuratively. As I drove home through Seattle's Friday evening traffic, I reflected on the extraordinary week that had transformed my life completely. In just 5 days, I had gone from the supportive wife living with painful suspicions to a soon-to-be divorced woman with a strategic role at Meridian Technologies and a clear-eyed understanding of exactly who James Reeves really was. The consequences of his actions were still unfolding, rippling outward to affect his reputation, his career, his relationships with family and colleagues. Those consequences would continue to develop in the coming weeks and months through legal proceedings, financial, investigations, and professional repercussions. But for the first time since I had discovered his betrayal, I was no longer focused on James's story. I was ready to begin writing my own. 3 months after that fateful weekend at Lake Crescent, I sat in Judge Harriet Sanderson's courtroom, listening as she delivered her ruling on the financial aspects of my divorce from James. The proceedings had been contentious, but mercifully brief, thanks to the mountain of evidence Jennifer had assembled. Having reviewed all submitted documents and testimony, Judge Sanderson announced, her voice clear and authoritative, this court finds compelling evidence of systematic financial misconduct and deliberate attempts to hide marital assets by the respondent, James Reeves. Jennifer squeezed my hand under the table, a small gesture of triumph. Across the aisle, James sat stiffly beside Brandon Mitchell, his expression carefully neutral despite the devastating ruling unfolding before him. Therefore, the judge continued, in addition to the equitable division of all identified marital assets, the court awards Mrs. Reeves 50% of Mr. Reeves's ownership stake in Meridian Technologies, to be transferred as direct shares rather than cash value. This was the outcome we had hoped for, but hadn't dared count on. Direct ownership of Meridian shares rather than a cash buyout that James could potentially manipulate or delay. With this ruling, I would become one of the largest individual shareholders in the company I had helped build. Furthermore, Judge Sanderson added, reviewing her notes, given the documented misuse of marital funds for personal expenses related to his extramarital relationship, Mr. Reeves will be responsible for all legal fees incurred by Mrs. Reeves during these proceedings. I didn't look at James, though I could feel his eyes on me. Instead, I focused on maintaining the same calm composure I had cultivated throughout the divorce process, neither gloating in victory nor showing vulnerability in his presence. After the hearing concluded, Jennifer and I exited the courthouse to find several reporters waiting on the steps, no doubt alerted by Brandon Mitchell, who had consistently attempted to try the case in the media when the evidence against his client proved overwhelming in court. Mrs. Reeves, one called out, how do you respond to allegations that you orchestrated a corporate takeover using personal marital issues as leverage? Jennifer stepped forward smoothly. The court's ruling speaks for itself. The judge reviewed extensive evidence of financial misconduct and ruled accordingly. Mrs. Reeves has no further comment at this time. As we descended the courthouse steps, I spotted Maya waiting discreetly by a black SUV across the street. She had continued working with me throughout the divorce proceedings, shifting from investigator to security consultant as James's behavior became increasingly unpredictable. Congratulations, she said simply as we approached. The ruling was everything we hoped for? Everything and more. Jennifer confirmed, her professional restraint giving way to genuine satisfaction. Harriet didn't leave a single loose end for Mitchell to exploit on appeal. Maya nodded approvingly, opening the vehicle door. Your dinner reservation is confirmed for 7:00. The restaurant has been informed that privacy is a priority. The celebration dinner had been Jennifer's idea, a small gathering of the people who had supported me through the divorce process, scheduled for after the final ruling regardless of outcome. Now it would be a true celebration rather than a consolation. Will you join us? I asked Maya, who had become more than just a professional resource during these challenging months. She smiled but shook her head. I have another client this evening, but I appreciate the invitation. As we drove away from the courthouse, I watched Seattle's familiar skyline take shape against the summer sky. So much had changed in 3 months, yet the city remained the same. The Space Needle rising above the buildings, Mount Rainier visible in the distance on clear days, Elliott Bay sparkling in the afternoon sun. I had changed too in ways both obvious and subtle. The external transformations were easy to catalog. I had moved from the Madison Park house into a downtown apartment overlooking the water. I had accepted a permanent position on Meridian's executive team as Director of Corporate Ethics and Governance, a new role created in the wake of James's departure. I had even changed my appearance, cutting my long hair into a sleek bob that felt like shedding an outdated version of myself. The internal changes were harder to articulate, but more profound. The woman who had spent years accommodating James's needs at the expense of her own, who had ignored warning signs and suppressed her intuition to preserve a failing marriage, who had shrunk herself to fit into the narrative he constructed, that woman was gone. In her place was someone more deliberate, more certain of her own perceptions, more willing to prioritize truth over comfort. Someone who had faced betrayal and emerged not just intact, but strengthened by the experience. Penny, for your thoughts? Jennifer asked, noticing my contemplative silence. I was just thinking about how different everything is from a year ago, I replied. Last summer, I was planning our 10th anniversary celebration, completely unaware of what was happening right in front of me. And now you're a free woman with an executive position, substantial assets, and the satisfaction of knowing you handled an impossible situation with remarkable grace, Jennifer completed. Not to mention the look on James's face when the judge awarded you direct shares in Meridian. That alone was worth my fee. I smiled at her attempt to lighten the mood. I wasn't watching him. How did he look? Like a man who suddenly realized that the chess match he thought he was winning had been lost 6 moves ago, Jennifer replied with professional satisfaction. Mitchell had clearly assured him that the share transfer wouldn't happen. The cash value maybe, but not direct ownership. The share transfer was particularly significant because of Meridian's current situation. In the months following James's departure, the company had not just survived, but thrived. The audit had uncovered and corrected numerous inefficiencies in James's management. Key client relationships had been strengthened under more attentive leadership. New security protocols had been implemented to prevent future vulnerabilities. Most notably, Meridian had recently received a legitimate acquisition offer from a major tech conglomerate, one that valued the company at nearly twice what Westbrook Ventures had been prepared to pay in James's secretive deal. If approved by shareholders, the acquisition would make even minority stakeholders like me quite wealthy. Has James made any further attempts to contact you? Jennifer asked as we neared my apartment building. Not since the restraining order, I confirmed. After several weeks of escalating messages, beginning with vague threats and progressing to explicit accusations, James had crossed a line by appearing at my new apartment unannounced and attempting to force his way past security. The resulting temporary restraining order had finally given him pause, particularly when the judge warned that any violations could impact the financial settlement. Good. Let's hope today's ruling gives him the closure he needs to move on. Jennifer's tone suggested she didn't find this particularly likely, but was willing to be optimistic. After confirming the dinner details, I said goodbye to Jennifer and headed up to my apartment to change before the evening's celebration. The space was still somewhat minimally furnished. I had left most of our shared possessions in the Madison Park house, preferring to start fresh rather than surround myself with reminders of my marriage. The apartment's clean lines and open layout suited my current preferences perfectly. Floor-to-ceiling windows showcased Elliott Bay, while the simplified decor reflected my desire for clarity and functionality rather than the carefully curated luxury James had always preferred. As I changed from my conservative courtroom attire into something more celebratory, I caught sight of myself in the bedroom mirror. The woman who looked back at me seemed both familiar and new. The same features, but carrying a different expression, a different energy. My phone chimed with a message from Sarah. On my way, bringing champagne worthy of today's victory. I smiled, grateful for her unwavering support throughout the divorce process. She had been there for the difficult moments, the days when doubt crept in, the nights when the enormity of starting over felt overwhelming, the painful process of explaining the situation to mutual friends who struggled to reconcile the charming James they knew with the man revealed by the evidence. The dinner gathering was small but significant. Jennifer and 2 members of her legal team, Richard and Sophia from Meridian, Sarah and her husband, my younger sister Kate, who had flown in from Boston specifically for the court ruling. These were the people who had formed my support system during the most challenging transition of my life. We gathered at Canlis, one of Seattle's most iconic restaurants, with its spectacular views and discreet service. The private dining room Jennifer had reserved offered both celebration and seclusion, a perfect combination given the high-profile nature of the divorce within certain Seattle circles. To Elena, Richard proposed once everyone had been seated, and served champagne, who not only saved Meridian from potential disaster, but has since helped guide it to unprecedented success. And, Jennifer added, raising her glass, who demonstrated extraordinary grace under pressure throughout a situation that would have broken many people. To wisdom, strength, and new beginnings, Sophia concluded. As glasses clinked and conversations flowed around me, I felt a complex mixture of emotions: gratitude for these supportive relationships, pride in having navigated such difficult circumstances, and yes, a sense of vindication that the truth had ultimately prevailed. But beneath these positive feelings lay something more nuanced, a quiet acknowledgement of the pain that had preceded this moment, the loss of the future I had once believed in. The disillusionment that comes with discovering someone you loved deeply was not who they claimed to be. Kate, always attuned to my emotional state, slipped into the chair beside me during a lull in the conversation. "You okay?" she asked softly. "You've got that faraway look." "I'm good," I assured her. "Just reflecting on the journey from there to here. It's been quite a year." Kate nodded, understanding without requiring further explanation. "You know what I keep thinking about?" she said after a moment. "That family dinner last Christmas when James was texting under the table the whole time, and you asked if everything was okay at work. I remembered it clearly, James claiming urgent client concerns while he was actually coordinating with Olivia about their post-holiday plans." "You had this look," Kate continued, "just for a second, like you didn't quite believe him. That was the first time I wondered if something might be wrong. But then you smiled and changed the subject, and I thought maybe I'd imagined it." "I was already suspicious by then," I admitted, "but not ready to know for sure. Sometimes we see exactly what's happening, but aren't prepared to acknowledge it, even to ourselves." "And now?" Kate asked. "Are you ready for whatever comes next?" The question was simple but profound. Was I ready for a future entirely different from the one I had planned? Ready to trust again after such betrayal? Ready to define myself not as James's wife or James's ex-wife, but simply as Elena? "I think I am," I said slowly. "Not for any specific outcome, but for the process of discovery, for writing my own story instead of playing a supporting role in someone else's. Kate squeezed my hand. That's my sister, always finding wisdom in difficult situations. As dinner progressed to dessert, conversations shifted from the divorce proceedings to future plans. Meridian's potential acquisition, Jennifer's upcoming vacation to Portugal, Sarah's new business venture. Life continues and evolves for all of us. When the evening finally concluded, warm hugs and promises to keep in touch were exchanged outside the restaurant. As the others departed in various directions, I decided to walk along the waterfront before heading home, wanting some quiet time to process the day's events. The Seattle summer evening was perfect, warm but not hot, the sky still light at nearly 9 o'clock. As I walked, I thought about the video evidence that had started this journey. James and Olivia entering the Olympic Hotel together, his hand on the small of her back, the casual intimacy of their interaction. At the time, seeing that footage had been devastating, confirming my worst fears about my marriage. Now, I could recognize it as a moment of painful clarity that had ultimately led to liberation. From deception, from self-doubt, from a relationship that had become fundamentally dishonest. My phone buzzed with a text message, expecting Sarah, or Kate checking to make sure I'd gotten home safely. I was surprised to see an unfamiliar number. Heard about the ruling. He's not taking it well. Thought you should know. Olivia. I stared at the message, unsure how to respond or whether to respond at all. After the initial confrontation at Lake Crescent, she had disappeared from Seattle, reportedly returning to her hometown in California. What was she trying to communicate with this cryptic warning? Before I could decide, another message appeared. I'm sorry for my part in all this. I believed what he told me about your marriage, about you. I was wrong. An apology I hadn't expected, and wasn't sure I needed. What could I possibly say in response? That I forgave her? That seemed premature and perhaps insincere. That I understood how James could be persuasive, manipulative even? That felt too much like absolving her of responsibility. In the end, I simply replied, "Thank you for letting me know." Simple, neutral, neither accepting her apology nor rejecting it. An acknowledgement without engagement. Then I blocked the number, not out of lingering anger, but because that chapter of my life was closed. Whatever relationship James and Olivia had or hadn't maintained was no longer my concern. As I continued my walk along the waterfront, I realized that today's court ruling represented more than just the formal end of my marriage or a favorable financial settlement. It marked the conclusion of a chapter defined by James's betrayal and my response to it. The past year had been a masterclass in difficult truths about my marriage, about James, about myself. I had learned that intuition deserves respect, that red flags don't disappear when ignored, that silence can sometimes be strategic rather than submissive. Most importantly, I had discovered my own capacity for decisive action in the face of betrayal. Rather than allowing myself to be defined as a victim of James's deception, I had chosen to respond with clarity, purpose, and ultimately, dignity. The waterfront path curved around the bay, offering a panoramic view of the Seattle skyline now, beginning to light up against the darkening sky. I paused, taking in the familiar yet ever-changing vista. This was what vindication felt like, I realized. Not triumph over James or satisfaction in his downfall, but something quieter and more profound. The deep, settled certainty that I had faced an impossible situation with integrity and emerged, stronger for the experience. Whatever came next, new relationships, new challenges, new opportunities, I would approach with the wisdom gained from this journey. Not with suspicion or cynicism, but with clearer eyes and a deeper understanding of both others and myself. As I turned toward home, I felt something I hadn't expected to feel on this day that formally ended my marriage: anticipation. For the first time in longer than I could remember, I was genuinely curious about what tomorrow might bring. 1 year to the day after I confronted James at Lake Crescent, I stood at the podium in Meridian Technologies' newly renovated headquarters, addressing the assembled employees, board members, and media representatives. The occasion was momentous, the official announcement of Meridian's acquisition by Telarus Global, a technology leader whose resources and reach would amplify Meridian's innovations worldwide. Today marks not just a corporate milestone, but the culmination of many people's vision, dedication, and resilience. I began, scanning the faces of colleagues who had weathered the storm of James's departure and the subsequent rebuilding. When I think about Meridian's journey, particularly over this past year, I'm reminded that our greatest challenges often reveal our greatest strengths. From my position at the podium, I could see Richard beaming with pride, Sophia nodding in Tafuai agreement, and dozens of employees whose jobs had been secured and expanded through the careful stewardship that followed James's removal. The acquisition deal valued Meridian at nearly triple its worth from a year ago, turning modest employee stock options into significant windfalls and making early investors like Richard exceptionally wealthy. As part of the transition leadership team, I had helped negotiate terms that protected Meridian's workforce and culture while leveraging Telarus's global infrastructure. My role as Director of Corporate Ethics and Governance would continue in the merged organization, expanded to oversee compliance across North American operations. When we face unexpected disruptions, whether personal or professional, we have a choice, I continued. We can allow those disruptions to define us, or we can use them as catalysts for meaningful growth and transformation. Meridian chose the latter, and today's announcement is the result of that collective choice. The irony wasn't lost on me that, exactly 1 year ago, I had been setting up surveillance cameras in a lakeside cabin, preparing to confront my husband's betrayal. Now I stood before a gathering of business leaders, helping to shape the future of the company he had nearly destroyed. After concluding my remarks, I joined Richard and the Telarus executives for the ceremonial signing and photographs. As cameras flashed and hands were shaken, I caught sight of a familiar face at the back of the room, Maya Sullivan, dressed in business attire rather than her usual understated surveillance clothes. I made my way to her when the formalities concluded. "This is a surprise. I didn't realize you were on the guest list." "Professional curiosity," she replied with her characteristic slight smile. "I like to see how my cases resolve long-term. Not all of them have such definitively positive outcomes." We moved to a quieter corner as the reception continued around us. "Have you heard anything about James recently?" I asked, realizing I hadn't thought about him in weeks. "Professionally or personally?" "Either," I admitted. "I've been so focused on the acquisition that I haven't kept track." Maya nodded thoughtfully. "Professionally, he's struggled. The financial penalties from the divorce and the reputation damage from the Meridian situation have limited his options. He tried consulting for a while, then took a mid-level position with a startup in Austin, significantly below his previous status. He's been there about 4 months now." I absorbed this information without the emotional punch it might have delivered a year ago. James's career trajectory was no longer intertwined with my own, his successes or failures no longer relevant to my daily life. "And personally?" I asked, more out of closure than concern. "He and Olivia are no longer together," Maya reported. "That ended shortly after the Lake Crescent confrontation. He's kept a low profile socially since relocating to Texas." Again, the information landed neutrally. There had been a time when knowing James was alone might have triggered either satisfaction or sympathy. Now it was simply a fact about someone I used to know intimately but no longer did. "And what about you?" Maya asked, shifting the conversation. "Beyond the professional success which is evident. How are you, Elena?" The question was simple but deserved honest reflection. "I'm good," I said after a moment. Not just functioning or surviving, but genuinely thriving. It took time to process everything, but I'm in a healthy place now. You've certainly handled the aftermath better than most clients I've worked with, Maya observed. Many struggle to move beyond the betrayal, letting it color their perspective indefinitely. I had help, I acknowledged, thinking of the therapy sessions that had been crucial to my healing process. And I made a conscious decision not to let James's actions determine my future happiness. That would be giving him power he doesn't deserve. Our conversation was interrupted by Richard, who needed me for introductions to key Talaris executives. I excused myself, promising to catch up with Maya later, though we both knew such casual social commitments often went unfulfilled. The acquisition celebration continued well into the evening, transitioning from formal presentations to a more relaxed gathering at a nearby restaurant. Amidst the congratulations and discussions of future plans, I found myself reflecting on the extraordinary path that had led to this moment. If James hadn't betrayed me, if I hadn't discovered his affair and financial misconduct, if I hadn't documented everything methodically and confronted him strategically, none of today's positive outcomes would have materialized. Meridian might have been secretly sold to Westbrook at a fraction of its value. Employees might have lost jobs in the subsequent restructuring. James and Olivia might be living off the proceeds in Bali as planned. Instead, a painful personal discovery had catalyzed a series of events that ultimately benefited dozens of people beyond myself. There was a profound lesson in that sequence. How actions motivated by self-preservation could ripple outward to create broader positive change. Around midnight, as the celebration finally wound down, I declined offers of shared rides and chose to walk the few blocks to my apartment. The Seattle spring night was mild, the streets still lively with restaurant-goers and theater-goers enjoying the city's vibrant nightlife. Back in my apartment, I slipped off my heels and poured a single glass of wine, carrying it to the balcony that overlooked Elliott Bay. The water reflected the city lights, creating a mirror image of the skyline against the dark surface. I had always loved this view, the visual reminder that perspectives could be inverted, that what seemed solid could also be fluid. My phone buzzed with a message from Sarah. Just saw the acquisition news online. Champagne brunch tomorrow to celebrate? You're officially a corporate power player now. I smiled at her enthusiasm. Sarah had been instrumental in my personal recovery over the past year, providing both distraction and support as I rebuilt my life post-James. She had introduced me to new social circles, insisted I join her weekly tennis group, and gently encouraged me when I began cautiously dating again a few months after the divorce was finalized. The dating experience had been educational, sometimes awkward, occasionally promising, ultimately clarifying. I had learned that I wasn't emotionally damaged beyond repair, as I had initially feared. I could still connect with others, still feel attraction and interest, but I had also discovered a newfound selectiveness, an unwillingness to ignore early warning signs or compromise my core needs for the sake of a relationship. My most recent date had been with Michael, a literature professor I'd met at a university fundraiser. Intelligent, thoughtful, with no connection to Seattle's tech community or my previous life with James. Our conversations had been engaging, our chemistry promising. We had plans for dinner again next week, neither rushing nor resisting whatever might develop between us. I texted Sarah back confirming brunch, then set my phone aside and returned to contemplating the view. 1 year after the most painful discovery of my life, I had not just survived but reconstructed my existence on stronger foundations. My career was thriving, my finances secure, my personal relationships authentic and reciprocal. The contrast between my current reality and what might have been was stark. Had I not trusted my instincts, had I continued ignoring the signs of James's betrayal, I would likely still be living in blissful ignorance. Or worse, might have eventually discovered his deception after he had successfully hidden assets and prepared a more advantageous exit strategy. Instead, I had faced the painful truth head-on, gathered evidence methodically, and acted decisively when the moment was right. Those choices had altered the trajectory of not just my life, but the lives of everyone connected to Meridian Technologies. There was a universal lesson in that sequence of events, one that extended beyond my personal circumstances to a broader wisdom about confronting difficult truths. Awareness, even of painful realities, is ultimately less damaging than ignorance. Documentation transforms suspicion into evidence, and strategic action, however challenging, creates the possibility of justice and renewal. As I finished my wine and prepared for bed, I reflected on what I would tell someone else facing a similar situation: the betrayal of trust by someone they had loved and believed in completely. What wisdom had I gained that might ease another's journey through such treacherous terrain? Trust your instincts, I would tell them. When something feels wrong, pay attention rather than dismissing your own perceptions. Document what you observe, not out of vindictiveness, but to establish objective reality amidst gaslighting and deception. Seek professional guidance rather than acting from raw emotion. Maintain your dignity throughout, regardless of how others behave. And perhaps most importantly, focus on the future you can create rather than the past you cannot change. These insights hadn't come easily or immediately. They had been hard-won through months of pain, confusion, anger, and gradually healing. But they had transformed a potentially devastating experience into one that ultimately strengthened rather than diminished me. The next morning, I woke early, refreshed despite the late night. My weekend routine had evolved over the past year into a comforting rhythm: morning coffee on the balcony, a run along the waterfront, fresh flowers from the Pike Place market, quiet hours with books or friends, or simply my own thoughts. Today would include celebratory brunch with Sarah, likely extending into afternoon conversations about the acquisition and whatever else emerged. Tomorrow would bring new projects at Meridian's transitioning headquarters, continuing my work with the integration team. Next week, I held dinner with Michael, tennis with Sarah's group, a board meeting at the counseling center where I now served as a volunteer advisor. All of these elements, professional achievements, social connections, personal interests, were pieces of the life I had consciously constructed after the dissolution of my marriage. Not a reaction to loss, but an intentional creation based on clearer understanding of my own needs and values. This was perhaps the most profound impact of confronting James's betrayal: the opportunity to re-examine everything I had accepted without question during our marriage and determine which elements truly served my authentic self. As I prepared for the day ahead, I caught sight of my reflection in the bedroom mirror. The woman looking back at me was visibly different from the one who had discovered her husband's affair a year ago, more confident in her posture, more peaceful, in her expression, more fully herself in every observable way. The external changes were noteworthy but superficial compared to the internal transformation. I had walked through fire and emerged not just intact, but illuminated, able to see myself and others with greater clarity, to distinguish truth from illusion, to recognize both vulnerability and strength as essential aspects of a fully lived life. If James could see me now, I wondered briefly, would he recognize the woman he had so profoundly underestimated? The thought passed quickly, irrelevant to who I had become. His perception no longer mattered, hadn't mattered for longer than I could precisely identify. What mattered was the life spread before me, rich with possibilities I was now equipped to recognize and pursue. What mattered was the wisdom gained through difficulty, the resilience developed through adversity, the authenticity reclaimed through necessary endings and new beginnings. As I stepped out into the bright Seattle morning, I carried this understanding not as a burden of past pain, but as a compass for future navigation. Whatever challenges lay ahead, professional, personal, or entirely unexpected, I would face them with clearer vision and stronger purpose, knowing that even the darkest revelations can ultimately lead to the most illuminating truths. The woman, who had once filmed her husband with his mistress on their anniversary, was still part of me. Her courage and strategic thinking had made my current life possible. But she was no longer my whole identity. She was simply one chapter in a continuing story that I was now writing on my own terms, one conscious choice at a time. And that, perhaps, was the most perfect revenge of all. Not the exposure of James's betrayal, or the dismantling of his carefully constructed deceptions, but the creation of a life so authentic and fulfilling that his absence had become not a wound, but a gateway to unexpected possibilities. As Sarah's car pulled up for our brunch celebration, I stepped forward into another day of this new life, grateful for the difficult wisdom that had brought me here, and ready for whatever revelations still awaited on the path ahead. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.